27. The Stillness. Author's note. The forum for this story has been updated with the new runes and their descriptions. The link for it is on my profile. If you have any questions about them, feel free to ask there, and I will answer where all can see. Thank you to all of my many reviewers. Your feedback, both negative and positive, help keep me inspired. I look forward after every chapter to hearing what people think about this story and how it develops. I would like any feedback you guys can give me on what strikes you the most about this story. What keeps you interested? I want to update the summary, but I'm finding it hard to accurately describe this story in only a few sentences. Thank you. Many thanks to JDH41 and GJ Mega for pre-reading, editing, and supporting this story. Words move, music moves only in time, but that which is only living can only die. Words, after speech, reach into the silence. Only by the form, the pattern, can words or music reach the stillness. T.S. Eliot. It was hard to believe it had been a month since the last time they had met. Harry sat in his low chair, watching as his four friends talked. Luna was still off traveling with her father across Ireland, searching for some creature or another. So it was still the two Slytherins and Gryffindors practicing, at that moment, transfiguration spells. They had all finished their homework now, and had started looking over their books, with the exception of Hermione, who had declared that she had already finished with them. That statement was met with several eye rolls, all of which the girl ignored with good grace. Harry couldn't quite bring himself to join them. His magic felt odd in his chest, unsettled and on edge. He hadn't been as active practicing magic the last time he had done a ritual to the moon, and hoped that was why he hadn't noticed it the last time. If it was something new, it could mean he would lose his abilities much sooner in the ritual, a thought that filled him with dread. Hermione glanced his way, smiled encouragingly, then turned back to Neville, gesturing with excited hands about something in the book in front of her. She then lifted her wand, casting a spell with firm and controlled flicks. A pencil beside the book wiggled and changed, growing legs and a tail, stretching out its paws and perking velvet ears. The miniature cat meowed, and its voice, instead of a cat's meow, sounded something like a bird's chirp. Neville laughed and Hermione frowned. Harry, watching them, smiled before looking blankly down at the book in front of him. Another 4 runes, just 4 more this time and done, 4 more and done. Harry glanced up from where he was sitting in the small library, looking over another large tome on wizarding law. Remus looked withdrawn and sad, a fact that made Harry sit up straight and close the book. Remus. His tutor walked in, paused, then sat across from him with a sigh. He was silent for a minute, then spoke. I need a favor, but first I need to tell you what I've been trying to do. Harry frowned. All right. Remus looked down at his hands, large and worn, then folded them together on the table. The situation, with the wolf and it thinking of you as the alpha of its pack, I needed more information. I couldn't get much from books that wasn't about Fenrir, which I hope is inaccurate, or at least biased. Most of the books are biased, branding us monsters. Remus drifted off, sighed. So I thought to go to a werewolf conclave in person. Unfortunately, the ones in Europe are not very open to me because of who made me. They are private packs anyway, for their own safety as much as for anyone else's, part of why, well. Remus went silent again. Harry waited a beat, then spoke. I think it's a good idea to find more werewolves. What do you need from me? Remus glanced up, meeting his eyes for the first time, before dropping his gaze again to the table. I started looking in the Americas. There are a few packs there as well. One, in particular, was only started up a scant 8 years ago in the southeastern United States, the Pungo Lake Pack. They are accepting of all wolves from any bloodline to help form a new pack. I thought I could travel there, speak to them about what is happening. But, Harry questioned, mystified. Surely Remus didn't think Harry would say he couldn't go. He was new to this alpha thing as well, but he doubted the werewolf needed permission from him to do anything at all. It seemed primarily only the wolf responded to that. Remus suddenly growled, low and fierce, and his fists tightened. I was denied. What? Harry frowned, taken aback by the sudden violence. What do you mean? Remus stood, paced the short aisle between tables, frantic energy abruptly flooding off of him. All known dark creatures have to obtain permits to travel by international flu or portkey, the only wizarding means of teleportation across oceans. I filled out the paperwork, filed it, and they owled me back that at this time werewolves would not be allowed access. Cited public safety. Bullocks. Remus almost shouted the last word. Harry felt anger boiling in his own belly but quelled it. The room didn't need any more anger than it already had. I'll take you. Remus stopped, turning to him. Harry continued. That's what you wanted, right? Remus's shoulders slumped, the anger fading away like old paint in the sun. Yes. Harry waited for him to say more, but he didn't. He looked back down at the book he had been reading, then nodded. You are pretty sure it's because of me that you were denied. Remus didn't answer, and Harry continued. It makes sense. Make life hard for you, harder than it already is. Maybe convince you to search for employment elsewhere. Might even offer it themselves, some deal that shines much more than the current one. If they've done so already, you are free to go, though I warn you that any motive from the ministry is not in your best interest. He kept his tone formal, though inside he felt a pang of hurt. That pang was silenced when Remus's head came up, then shook quickly in denial. No, Harry, it's not that at all. I would like to be your tutor, though it seems obvious now that the ministry will stop that before the first part of term is even complete. I would never work for the ministry, not after what they've done, how they've treated us, knowing how they mean to treat you. Harry nodded, then smiled. When do you want to leave? The Pungo Lake Pack, based on land just outside the boundary of the Parseltongue Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, officially consisted of only 9 werewolves in total. Werewolf packs generally tended to range in the mid-30s, so it was obvious from the get-go that where they were going was only the beginnings of a true werewolf commune. Along with the 9 werewolves, there was also several wizards who were related or friends with the pack. But other than that, the area around the small magical group was purely muggle for a good 100 miles. The closest wizarding settlement located on a private island off the coast, known by the locals as the Outer Banks. Years prior, the federal government of the states decided to choose the Parseltongue Refuge to be the only place in North America that red wolves would exist in the wild outside of zoos. Smaller than their grey wolf cousins, red wolves didn't form a pack structure as much as simple pairings of 2 wolves and their respective cubs. The measure had been met by extreme disapproval from the locals, but went through nonetheless. Not long after, a splinter group of was from Yellowstone thought to set up camp there, where their tracks during full moons and infrequent sightings would help cloak their presence on the refuge as simply another, perhaps oddly large, wolf. With now nearly 100 red wolves on the 100,000-acre refuge, there was more than enough room for a pretty sizable pack to roam free, under wolfsbane of course. But werewolves were very pack-oriented by nature and family-oriented by culture. It had taken nearly a decade to get even 6 werewolves to join the original 3 who started the pack, and all of the newcomers were turned through force by others, and had not belonged to any normal werewolf commune as they grew up. Pungo Lake represented the one place where they could be with others of their kind, and not be ostracized by their origin, a place of freedom and eventually normality. Harry and Remus appeared directly in front of the mailbox that the Pungo Pack used as its official address. Unfortunately, it appeared that address and respective mailbox was nowhere near the actual commune. While Remus checked out the small metal box on a wooden post, Harry shrugged off his outer robe and contemplated taking the shirt off with it. It was sweltering, and while the heat didn't bother him, the humidity must have been extremely high, the air hazy with it. Remus jogged back over to him and copied his gesture, though he looked much more affected by the heat. Sweat was already beading on his forehead. There's no instructions in the box. I see a road sign over there, see Canal RD. That's this road. The other one is Lake Road, so maybe that would be a good place to start looking. Remus huffed at the last and tugged on the neck of his long-sleeved shirt. Harry grimaced. I don't think you will make a long walk without losing several layers. There wasn't any more information in the letter. Remus had communicated with a wizard from the American Magical Bureau, the state's version of a ministry. No, it only had this address. I don't think he quite understood that I intended to go here directly instead of communicating by mail, and I didn't think their mailbox might be somewhere totally different from where they are. Harry glanced around again. They stood on a single asphalt muggle road, and around them for several miles looked to be solid farm land, with the occasional house or shop speckled among random lines of pine trees. Well, what about the refuge itself? Remus pulled out a large fold-out map, then pointed to where they stood. We are only a mile from one side of the refuge here, where the Pungo Lake Pack is said to roam on full moons. It would make sense for their houses, or house, to be here too. Harry looked at the lone mailbox and snorted. Well, if they only get muggle mail, not owl, which is what is implied by all this, then perhaps the mug mail doesn't drive to each house directly. It looks like it's got to be on a paved road. Remus nodded, pulled again at his collar, and then rolled up his sleeves. So, Harry pointed down a dirt path leading off vertically from the road. So, I suggest following this path. It's the only branch near this box, and it looks like it's seen some muggle traffic recently. Remus nodded, and they began to walk. Within 15 minutes, Remus had ditched his shirt and was growling audibly about the heat. Why on earth would anyone want to live in a place that gets this hot in the summer? It has to be hot enough to fry an egg. Harry shrugged, probably used to it. Remus gave him a narrow-eyed stare that took in the fact that Harry hadn't broken a sweat. He huffed, then stared straight ahead. On both sides of the first path there was now tall rows of bright green corn, the outer long leaves curled slightly in the heat. The rows seemed to be impossibly wafting heat right back at them instead of the coolness Harry generally associated with plants. It also blocked their view ahead as the path forked. They both paused, looking down both directions. Harry sighed. We could split, save time, or just keep going right. These paths could go for miles. Remus snorted. We'll get sunburns if we stay out here much longer. I should just contact the bureau again, get better directions, or perhaps put a letter in the mailbox back there. Harry was tempted to agree, sensing this could turn into the search for a needle among the haystacks, or in this case, cornfields. Wait, Remus said, eyes narrowed. Harry's eyebrows drew together, then he heard it. It was the rumble of muggle machinery and seemed to be coming closer. Harry expected to see a car, or perhaps truck, come around the corner ahead. But the sound kept growing, until he almost took a step back as what looked like at first glance some sort of hybrid truck train, boosted up on 8 large dual tires. It was as bright green as the corn around them, and pulling a large wheeled implement decked out with some sort of folded blades. Harry had read of muggle farming equipment in his elementary school long ago, but only seen them in picture books. What he saw now looked like it could be used in a war, and he bet anyone under those blades wouldn't look the same again if they encountered them. The muggle driving gave them an odd look, and the large piece of equipment rumbled to a stop in front of them. Its engine idled, and a man, tall and burly with a camouflage cap on his bald head, opened up the door on the tractor, jumping down the 3 steps to the ground with the grace of long practice. He walked over to them with a loping stride, bright blue eyes curious. "Can I help you?" His expression said he hadn't seen much odder than the two of them walking down this path. Harry exchanged a look with Remus, uncertain how much could be said to a muggle. Finally, Remus spoke with a bright smile. "We are looking for the house associated with the mailbox at the beginning of this path." The man's mouth tilted up into a smile. "You two ain't from around here. Hunting?" Remus's face twisted at the inquiry. "Ah, no." The man shrugged, spreading hands that were grimed with dirt. "We get a lot of folks from out of town, round here, still back there." He gestured towards the fork he had come from. "There ain't nothing but fields and refuge, and it's gated off. Only entrance to there is back on 99, turn at that old food mart. The other way." He shrugged, adjusted his cap, and mopped at the sweat beginning to form on his own face with one corner of his shirt, which also boasted a layer of dust. "Private drive, gated too. Guess you could walk under, but it's got no trespassing signs up and purple on the trees. That's a standard sign for no hunting." He helpfully supplied before once more launching into talk in a heavily accented voice. "Unless you're expected, I wouldn't walk it. People get mighty particular about people on their land they don't know." Remus nodded, glanced at Harry and smiled. "Thank you, we are expected." The muggle hummed, looked them over in disbelief, then simply shrugged. "Suit yourself." He held out one hand. Remus looked down at it for a second, then carefully clasped it. The man shook it up and down. "Name's Carlos, nice to meet you." Remus returned his smile tentatively. "Remus Lupin, nice to meet you too." At that, the muggle nodded again, then turned and hopped back into the cab, closing the door with a hard slam. The engine revved, and the whole large thing moved off in a cloud of dust. Remus only shook his head. Americans. Harry followed the tractor with his eyes as it rumbled off, then looked up at Remus with a grin. He's probably thinking, stupid foreigners, us out here with no vehicle and dressed for cool weather. Lucky he didn't ask more questions than he did. Remus snorted, then joined in the laughter as they took the left fork. Lucky for them, after they ducked around a bright yellow gate, the endless rows of corn were left behind and replaced with woodland that provided blessed shade from the hot sun. Remus relaxed as they walked, looking around with curious eyes and occasionally taking large whiffs of air. I can almost smell wolves this close to the next full moon. I picked up a scent marker back at the gate, but nothing since. You. Harry glanced at the man beside him, seeing the lines of excitement beginning to form in his face and in the fast stride. Nothing magical, if that's what you mean. Remus nodded, but looked disappointed. They continued to walk, following the pitted muggle truck tracks, the path now mostly covered in thick summer grass except for 2 rows of worn and hardened dirt. Obviously, whoever lived here drove out pretty often to wear the dirt away. They turned a corner, and Harry felt it. He stopped, and Remus took another step before he, too, paused. Harry spoke, eyes narrowed. Basic warding structure. We've already triggered an alarm of sorts, probably their version of a doorbell. There's a cloak of some sort up, and an anti-muggle ward. Any muggle walking in would turn right back around at this point, thinking it their own idea. Remus nodded, before glancing around. On either side, large oaks and maples reached high overhead, and on the right a single muggle power pole marked the end of an electric grid. In front of them seemed to be more woodland, but now that he was looking for it, he could sense the disconnect. Remus spoke softly, abruptly aware that they could be being watched at that very moment. It's a glamour. I can smell the signs of a settlement. It covers sight and sound, but not smell. Very good. The voice was deep, male, and cheerful. In front of them the air seemed to waver slightly, then stepping forward was a tall black man, bald with warm brown eyes, and wearing a forest green sleeveless shirt and khaki shorts. He smiled at the two of them as if seeing a pot of gold. Welcome to Pungo Lake Retreat. What can I do for you? We don't get many wizards passing through here. Remus glanced at Harry, then stepped forward. My name is Remus Lupin. I wanted to speak with the Remus drifted off, suddenly uncertain, then his chin lifted. With the alpha of this pack. The man didn't pause, but only continued to stare at them with a bemused expression. Well, go ahead. Remus' eyes widened, and without realizing it, he took a deep breath, taking in the smells wafting in front of him. The wolf sat behind his eyes and smelled pine and oil and meat and wolf, wolf, wolf. Remus hadn't noticed it, but the wolf had, and now the two of them assimilated the scents together in an exchange of information he hadn't facilitated since his teenage years. The man was in his prime, younger than Remus himself, and had the bearing of a born wolf, a rare occurrence among the werewolf community, as it required a non-werewolf witch and werewolf wizard to conceive a child, and most couples consisted of 2 werewolves. Then that child would also have to be turned before puberty, or else an inherent immunity would be in place to prevent full transformations. The man's entire sense screamed alpha, leadership, authority, and the wolf crouched lower inside his mind, whining. Remus flinched and took a step back, his senses overloaded with it, his heart beginning to race in a flight or fight response. He felt the air move, and Harry stepped up and in front of him, glaring, and immediately the wolf quieted down. Remus blinked quickly, trying to process the rapid emotions, hearing Harry speaking in a low, deadly voice. Stop it, whatever you are doing to him now. The large man raised both palms, his smile fading to be replaced with puzzlement. I'm sorry, no harm meant. He looked past Harry at Remus, then back to Harry. I assumed he was the leader of the 2 of you as he spoke first. It's customary for alphas of meeting packs to greet each other in such a way, to establish boundaries and, well, say hello. The man took a deep breath of his own, the confusions only growing on his face. But you're not even a werewolf. His voice went from puzzled to incredulous. Remus straightened from what he realized with embarrassment was a half-crouch and steadied himself. He had been reminded with a passion why he didn't associate with werewolves. Remus spoke, but didn't look directly at the other man. That's why we're here. We need advice. The black man glanced between the 2 of them and suddenly began to laugh. I'll say, well, come on in and we'll talk inside where it's cool. I'm Morris, by the way. He turned, took 2 steps, and vanished. Harry glanced at Remus again, and the boy's eyes were worried. That alone was enough to bolster his pride. He straightened, and the wolf stood at attention behind his eyes, ready to step for the first time onto true pack ground. "Let's go." Harry nodded. Remus was ready, but it was what was supposed to be his charge who stepped forward first, and that fact was enough to hit home to him just how much the wolf was changing him already. He followed, and stepped through the glamour into a much larger complex than he had been expecting. Harry kept a wary eye on Remus and Morris as the large man led them on a brief tour on the way to what he called the living quarters. He had seen Remus' magic creep out, and then snap back when he had locked eyes with the American werewolf, and had also seen the terror that overtaken him afterwards. His first thought had been some sort of mental attack, enough that he had stepped between them on edge. But the man had immediately backed down, shifting his gaze aside, and Harry had realized that they had stumbled upon some greeting ritual they knew nothing about. It made him uneasy, and he wondered just how many more misunderstanding they might have before they left. Originally, he had thought he could simply drop Remus off and come back for him. Now, he wouldn't leave until his tutor did. Morris gestured to either side as they walked, voice cheerful. "Got a good setup here. Raise our own beef and pork, with some chickens just starting to lay. Grow all the plants for wolfsbane in that greenhouse over there, along with other basics for potions and the like. We're a long ways from the nearest apothecaries, so we try to be pretty self-sufficient." His voice was easy and friendly, and Harry figured he was taking the long way to try and put Remus back at ease. It made him relax just a little more himself, as the wizard kept up his steady stream of information, voice full of pride. "Locals are friendly, for the most part at least to us in human form. Had a few of us shot at a year ago during one moon, and the rangers had reported several red wolf deaths due to firearms. Don't much like the wolves, though in my opinion they haven't done any damage. Now the coyotes, pests. Disease-ridden mongrels, breeding with wild dogs and causing trouble round folks' homes. A lot of our pack hunts are for their wild packs, doing some cleanup. It's open season, and their pelts can fetch a good price." Harry thought it odd that the man so casually spoke of killing and skinning another canine, and one that to him looked very similar to a wolf itself. But who was he to know? Did wolves hold grudges against other canid breeds? Mooney didn't seem to mind Padfoot. Morris continued as they approached a large rectangular building, its wooden siding covered in a light layer of moss. "We've got electricity set up here. As long as we don't do anything wild with spell casting, it works well enough. It's all underground from that last power pole, so the wards don't have to be taken down for any repairs by the muggles after storms and what not. Most of us are indoor this time of day. The heat can be brutal." He paused at a wide metal door, looking them over. "Now there may be several werewolves inside. Will you be all right?" Remus nodded, gritting his teeth. Harry stepped closer, then met Morris's gaze with determination. "This is new to both of us." Morris nodded, then turned and opened the door. A wave of cool air greeted them, and Harry breathed it in with a grateful sigh. He could bet part of the reason the commune had connected itself to Muggle power was for the AC alone. If he had lived here, he would have figured out a way to do the same, statute of secrecy or no. It looked, if anything, like what he would think a Muggle hunting lodge would look like. The walls were painted in light tan, the floors solid wood. Everything seemed to be trimmed in wood, from the moldings to the ceiling itself. There were wide windows facing the wooded side, letting dappled sunlight stream in. Large sofas littered the living area, and on the walls were the heads of various mounted wild creatures, most of them non-magical. On one sofa, 2 women, one brown-haired and skinned, and the other with honey-colored hair and red freckles that contrasted starkly with pale skin, glanced up in curiosity. Morris smiled and introduced them. "This is my wife, Matilda, and this here is Julie. Maddie and I started this pack with my little brother, Derek. Julie and her father joined a year or so after." Morris turned back to them. Remus cleared his throat and spoke. "Remus Lupin, and Remus floundered, and Harry simply introduced himself. "Harry Potter." He waited for any reaction and was relieved when he got none. Maddie glanced between them, then tossed a single braid over her shoulder and smiled. "Nice to meet you. We don't get many visitors, at least not the good sort." She rolled her eyes, and Morris explained. "The Bureau sends a man out every year to renew the permit. Have to prove our wards are solid and that everyone takes wolfsbane. Jerry's nice enough, but last year they sent George, and he's A. Morris drifted off, and Julie piped up. A bigoted son of a bitch. Matty swatted at the girl, and she darted away. Harry would probably figure her to be a teenager, maybe even his own age. Mind your tongue in front of the guests. Matty said sternly, and Julie repressed an obvious eye roll. Morris gestured them to a seat. Harry sat, and Julie looked him over with inquisitive eyes. It will be nice to have another boy my age around here. Harry frowned at a loss, and Morris quickly interceded. Remus and Harry are not here to look into joining the pack, merely for advice. Oh. Julie sounded disappointed, and Matty looked in surprise at her husband. Harry tried to read between the lines, and couldn't. He knew only slightly more about werewolves than he did about vampires, and he was living with one. The three turned to Remus, though Maris glanced deferentially at Harry first. The Alpha had been able to sense the dynamic, then a fact Harry would have to keep in mind. It might prove useful. Remus began to speak, looking haltingly between the three werewolves staring him down. I was turned at the age of 4 in a revenge move by a rogue werewolf in Britain. Anger and disgust flashed across the faces of the two older werewolves, though the girl only looked sad. Remus continued, staring blankly out the large window. I grew up alone, outside of any commune. I read enough about werewolves to fear others of my kind, and eventually myself. When wolfsbane came out, I took it when I could afford it, and locked myself up when I couldn't. I had only briefly encountered other wolves, and never in close quarters. Never, Julie echoed incredulously, and received an elbow from Maddie, who then smiled politely at Remus. Remus smiled fragilely, then continued. I've read how werewolf packs work and how dominance is achieved. Again, Remus paused and Morris nodded. Usually a fight in wolf form until one surrenders, or is killed. Julie muttered. Remus nodded, glanced at Harry, then sighed. 3 moons ago, I forgot to take the last dose of wolfsbane due to an accident. It was the first time I hadn't had it in nearly a year, so the result was fierce. Harry could see by the older two's expression that they knew exactly what Remus meant. I did not, have a good relationship with my wolf. I hated it, and it hated me. Julie looked offended, but Matty and Morris's faces did not judge. Harry figured they had heard something similar before. Remus continued, and now he looked down at his hands. So you can imagine how it felt to finally be free of me, my will. I nearly attacked several people, until Harry teleported me away, and even then I managed to nearly kill a muggle. Harry was forced to restrain me, not realizing the effects it could have. Harry abruptly found himself the target of 3 amazed eyes, and both Matty and Julie took simultaneous breaths, the information they received obvious in the widening of their eyes. Morris spoke slowly. So, to clarify, Harry here won a battle of wills and established himself as dominant. But that's impossible, Matty said, shaking her head. A normal wizard, even if by some miracle, and it would have to be a miracle, a full-grown werewolf on a blood run, even if they managed to restrain one of us, it wouldn't make them an alpha. Remus only shook his head. I don't understand it either, to be honest. I've looked in books, anything I could find, which isn't much in Britain. And then, the moon after. Remus looked toward Harry, and he took it as his cue to take over. Spoke concisely, recounting the event and Remus's reaction to his presence, withholding the details of his wings. Morris narrowed his eyes. Do you have any sort of canine animagus form? Harry shook his head. Remus sighed. This past moon. He looked at Harry apologetically. Harry stayed away and I just laid there. I didn't run. I slept through the whole thing. I had wolfsbane, of course, but it was like, Matty spoke up, her voice soft, like a piece was missing. Yes, Remus breathed. Matty reached out and patted his hand. Completely normal. The first few moons with a new alpha are like that if you're separated until the bond settles in. It's why a new alpha normally stays close to the pack. The last was said with a stern look at Harry, who lifted his hands. I was busy. Matty sniffed, but Morris interrupted before she could say anything else. This is the first time I've heard of anyone who did not have the lycanthropy disease being part of a pack, unless you count those with animagus forms who sometimes bond. But even then, it's never as the leader. We have an animagus with us here. His form is a Florida panther. Big, hulking black cat, and quite honestly, could give me a good fight. But if he did somehow manage to beat me, that wouldn't make him the alpha because he's not. Morris glanced at Harry, eyes narrowed, and Harry spoke with reluctance, knowing he had to give something up if they hoped to solve this. I've a connection to the moon as well. Remus shook his head, but Harry continued, knowing it needed to be said. I don't transform or anything, and it's not related to the moon cycle per se, only due to a ritual I was part of years back. I can communicate, if you call it that, with the sentience that we call the moon, and I was able to exchange some form of thought with Remus on those full moon nights. How? Julie demanded. Harry could see Morris and Matty wanted to know as well, but were too polite to say it. Harry just declined to answer with a shake of his head. Remus spoke up from beside him. It doesn't matter how, only that he can, and I want to know if it can be changed, if a werewolf can stop having an alpha. Harry saw both consternation and pity cross their faces, and knew the answer before Morris spoke. There are few lone wolves who leave a pack, whether by choice or not, and the end never goes well with them unless they join another. Once that connection is made, the wolf begins to depend upon it, like a drug, an addiction. If it is taken away, what you felt this last moon is only the tip of the iceberg. Some spiral down into depression, eventually seeking to take their own lives. Others go mad, with blood rage or simple fury at the world, and get put down by us or by the Bureau's enforcers, eventually. Remus closed his eyes. Tentatively, Morris continued, glancing apologetically at Harry. I don't pretend to know the situation between you two, but this pack would be more than willing to take you in if you need it. Life here is nice, peaceful, you can't ask for better. It was said with pride, and Matty reached out to link hands with her husband. Remus lifted his head, then sighed. I don't know. I just don't know what I even want anymore. Harry saw the truth of that in the conflict in his tutor's eyes. He spoke, reaching out to grasp Remus's shoulder. Maybe you should visit here a few days, learn how they live. I'm sure Sirius would be welcome as well if you need company, and you'll be able to ask them all the questions you've been having. Remus brightened, then dimmed. You would have to take us both over every day, and I can't ask that. Nonsense, Matty declared with finality. We have 4 cabins already built just collecting dust. You can stay the night, for however long you need to stay. You'll need to help with the chores, of course, and take your turn cooking. Remus began to respond, but Matty kept speaking over his denials with the practice of a mother. Go get this serious, and I'll brew up a welcoming meal. While Remus was dragged outside into the heat to see more of the complex by an impatient Julie, Morris stepped up beside Harry. I'm a fairly good wizard, went to the academy, up in Washington, D.C. That might not mean much to you, but it's one of the top magical schools in America. There's a few things that aren't adding up here. Harry remained silent, and Morris took that as permission to continue. You walked here, yet don't mention having hotels in the area. Which is good, as it would be a lie. There are no hotels near here, or taxis. Definitely no magical means, unless you rode brooms, and I see none on you. And Remus there, he could apparate. He looks like a decent wizard, and yet says you would need to take him here every day. Morris paused, and Harry smiled grimly. I never thought you unintelligent. I don't like to bring up any abilities I have when it's not needed. Morris nodded slowly. I won't ask how or what. But you're that werewolf's alpha, accident or no, and that means you're part of a pack now, however small. You need to learn how to deal with that, and that means running with us on a full moon. We learn things about others during that time, things that can't be hidden. Will that be okay with you? Harry didn't respond right away, but gave it the thought it deserved. He had known, if they were truly to get help and feedback on his and Remus' unique connection, it would require other werewolves to see them on the full moon. But that would mean showcasing his wings, most likely, and also that he would have to travel here the next full moon after cutting a rune. The werewolves would smell the blood, and probably the magic, which would be swollen and immense in light of the ritual. More explanations, more people aware of him, more potential weaknesses. But did he have a choice to help Remus? I'm willing, he said simply, and watched out the window as Remus entered a squat cabin several buildings down. That afternoon, Harry took Remus back to Hallam Street to pack an overnight bag for the next few days. Harry left Remus to explain the situation to Sirius and went up the stairs with a sigh. If Remus decided to stay for a full moon run, Harry would still have to take the werewolf back and forth across the ocean. something he was hesitant to agree to because of his upcoming ritual. But better now than later, when it was certain to be much worse. Harry sat at his desk and began to compose a letter to Hermione, informing her of the community and what it was like, and also his tentative plan to spend the upcoming full moon, after his ritual, among a pack of American werewolves. Sirius sat on the large bed, watching as his best friend began to carefully pack a ragged suitcase with different sets of clothing. "You're certain they have no idea who we are?" Remus glanced over with a weary smile. "If they didn't recognize Harry, I doubt they would you. The Auras are sure you are in Britain anyhow, so the likelihood of them sending any memos across the ocean is unlikely." Sirius nodded, then grinned. "So, are there any werewolf hearties among this group?" Remus didn't even pause, but rolled his eyes. "You're still a complete dog, Padfoot, just like our school days." Sirius only laughed. "Guilty." For a moment he was silent before he plopping back on the bed with a dramatic sigh. "I've packed enough to stay until the full moon. I think it would be good if you end up liking these people. They can teach you how to control the wolf." Remus slammed the leather case shut. "There is no controlling the wolf, Sirius, only living with it." Sirius looked up at the ceiling, idly watching a spider in one corner spin its web. "How do you know?" Remus turned with a glare. "Books." "Ha!" Sirius sat up with a pointed finger. "That's your problem. Always reading and believing everything you find in books. They weren't right about Harry, were they?" Remus scowled. "Even the werewolves we're meeting haven't ever heard of something like Harry, so that doesn't count as proof I'm wrong." Sirius narrowed his eyes. Fenrir's pack, without wolfsbane, and as bloody as they were, acted with purpose. They didn't attack their own allies, for one, and that means control, some form of it at least. I don't think you are giving these people enough credit." Remus's mouth twisted, but he picked up his suitcase and started for the door, tossing words over his shoulder. "They still use wolfsbane, Sirius. That means something." Sirius watched him go, then levered himself up and off the bed with a sigh to follow. Harry didn't stay after dropping Sirius and Remus off at the beginning of the wards around the werewolf commune. He couldn't quite identify what made him so uncomfortable there. A part of him simply felt like he was intruding into something private, somewhere he didn't belong. He had made a time to return for Remus, whether the man had decided to return to Hallam Street or stay among the wolves until the full moon. He watched his godfather's robed back disappear through the wards, then called up fire and teleported away. Within a day at the Pungo Lake Pack, Remus felt as if he had found a place he belonged. Not all the wolves were as welcoming as Morris and his wife, but none made him feel unwelcome. He was amazed by how normal the whole thing felt. Each family had their own cabin and their own set of chores to perform, based on what they did well. Only Julie was young enough to need schooling, and she was tutored by Matty and Glory. Even Sirius felt at ease there, once he no longer worried about one of the pack recognizing him as a convict. It was simply too peaceful and too hot to worry about things. The days were spent indoors, reading or watching Muggle television or playing Muggle games Remus had never heard of before. The pack was much more in tune with Muggles than any wizards Remus had ever encountered in Britain, though he didn't know if it was a werewolf thing or simply American. In the early mornings and late afternoon, any outdoor chores were done, when the temperatures were tolerable. Laurie, a short brown-haired woman with tanned skin, told him that the heat was only this fierce for about a month in the height of summer, but it was still much hotter than British summers. Remus wasn't sure if that was particularly encouraging or not, as even the thought of temperatures that high being normal made him want to sweat. But he had never felt so relaxed, among people who knew what he was and didn't care. He looked and observed, and could hardly tell that Morris was the alpha at all. He told as much to Sirius, who shrugged. "Perhaps it's only something you see when you're transformed." Remus nodded, but he wasn't convinced. He had heard stories of Fenrir, who made his pack live mostly naked in caves and forests, eating raw meat and drinking from streams. How Greyback, as he was called for the vivid streak of grey that ran down the back of his wolf form, had commanded, even in human form, his packmates to do horrible things to one another. But Morris, even when giving out any requests, did not command. He asked politely and with a smile. Never did Remus see that pulse of dominance he had felt when first introducing himself to the werewolf. He knew it was there, but Morris kept it under tight wraps. He finally broke down and asked Matty on the third day, as he helped her peel and chop, by hand, a bowl of fresh potatoes. He had been informed it was the season for the roots to be harvested. Matty looked up at him with a raised eyebrow. We call that the moon aura. All werewolves can summon it to some degree or another, and many of those turned from young ages and in tune with their wolf can use it for partial transformations, especially if close to the full moon. When greeting another pack, each alpha uses this aura to both confirm identity and as a greeting. It is not a dominance display unless there is a challenge, which rarely happens outside of wolf form. Remus's head reeled slightly at the information. In his books, there had been written eyewitness accounts of werewolf packs whose members boasted claws and fangs during the daylight. It was one of the things he had been scared of happening to himself, never being able to look human again. You mean any wolf can achieve that and then let it go? Matty smiled, flicking a cubed piece of potato into a bowl of water. Of course. Who would want claws all the time? Would get in the way. She lifted a hand, showcasing her perfectly manicured and blunt nails. Remus nodded, looking down, silent for a moment as he carefully used his peeling knife to cut. Then he spoke haltingly. So, how does a werewolf summon this aura? Matty didn't glance up as she spoke, her focus on the bowl in front of her. It's hard to explain and easier to show. It's the alpha's job to teach all the pack to control themselves, and part of that is the aura. Has anyone ever told you your eyes gleam yellow when you're angry or sad? Remus frowned, then nodded. Matty continued. That is the beginning of it. Comes with increased strength, stamina, and magical resistance. Werewolves would make great enforcers if there were not so many regulations against it. People fear what they cannot control, and werewolves by their nature are forces of chaos. To summon your aura, your wolf and yourself must be in complete agreement, which is why the alpha is usually the one to teach you. The alpha is the first thing a werewolf and his wolf agree on, a leader, protector. It is not that we are weak or less powerful, but we all need that person to look out for us, protect our backs, so to speak. She stopped, a vague look in her eyes. Remus looked back over, his voice quiet. What about the alpha who protects him? Maddie reached out a hand, touching his wrist where it had stopped holding a round potato limply. The pack does, of course. Neville was the last through the flue, shaking dust from his robes with a cough. Already seated, Blaze and Draco exchanged glances. They had decided to meet at Blaze's house, mostly because his mother was currently working long hours in a lab and wouldn't disturb them. Malfoy Manor wasn't exactly habitable to Neville, and Longbottom Manor would probably not allow a Malfoy to even step through the warded fireplace. The thought of confronting the formidable Dame Longbottom had also made that suggestion much more terrifying than the Zabini house. Well, here we are. Blaze drawled, looking at the perfectly manicured fingernails on one hand. Any news? Neville took a seat on the long sofa beside the two occupied chairs and grimaced. You know my grandmother is on the Wisengamot. She's holding the seat in trust for me when I come of age. She's been telling me more, this summer, about things that are going on. The new legislation, it was mentioned briefly in the newspaper, is slated to go through this autumn. Votes are pretty set, even if a comet drops from the sky on Fudge before then. It's much worse than what was implied in the papers. Professor Lupin won't be able to be Harry's tutor, which is the least of it. The regulations are going to make being any kind of dark creature, or even simply a being, a true torture. Centaurs, Murs, giants, everything but a goblin, and I don't doubt that's simply because they don't dare take on Gringotts. Blaze and Draco took in his words without blinking. Neville's shoulders drooped. But you knew that all already. Blaze sighed. Mostly. Suspected as much, really, as soon as Harry made his move known. Any choice would have been suspect. They only have another 2 years to corral him before he can claim the Potter seat, and people will follow him simply because of who he is. He already presents a large threat to the minister as it is. Draco leaned forward. Harry sent me a letter. He's been in communication with other members of the Wisengamot and a few heads in the ministry. A lot of people are dissatisfied with Fudge. Those articles in the newspaper, they were the doing of people within the ministry itself. We are close, so close to getting him out. Another year. Neville shook his head. It won't change the laws already passed before then. That takes more than just a minister. Blaze spoke up. It's a start. Neville nodded, but his shoulders stayed limp and defeated. Draco cleared his throat. There is something else. The other two looked over, Blaise with a raised eyebrow. Draco kept his face neutral as he spoke. I received an owl from Daphne Greengrass. She joined a study group last year and has hinted at the possibility of combining groups in the upcoming year for purposes of competing in dueling and academia. Neville immediately frowned, and Blaise shook his head. Draco spoke again before they could decline. The group consists of Terry Boot, Anthony Goldstein, Padma Patel, Sue Lee, and Zacharias Smith. Smith, Blaise swore with a grimace. Draco grinned but saw the calculating look on Neville's face. The Gryffindor began to smile. 4 Ravenclaws, a Hufflepuff, and a Slytherin, and more than one future seat on the Wisengamot. Blaise's negative expression began to clear, his own mind catching on quickly. Connections, future connections. Draco sighed dramatically. The things we must bear. At least they are all marginally intelligent. Neville shook his head. Still, doesn't seem right to just, I don't know, join groups. I don't know them by anything other than reputation anyway. And we are, well, friends. Neville finished lamely and avoided their gaze. He didn't think calling them friends was too forward, but they were Slytherins after all. It wouldn't surprise him. Blaise didn't even acknowledge the comment. What about Harry? What about him? Draco challenged. He doesn't tell us who we can or cannot be friends with, and this is just for studying at the moment. We can still meet on our own. Neville frowned. What about Hermione? Have you told her? Draco paused, and Neville saw with fascination the blonde actually at a loss for words. Blaise smirked. Why don't you mention Smith to her? Draco paled. Hedwig snapped at him when he untied the letter. The bloody owl had no respect at all. Draco snatched the letter free, then tossed the snowy owl a treat while he retreated to his desk to read. The letter was everything he thought it would be, and worse. If the Muggle-born had had access to a howler, Draco would have expected to have ringing ears. Smith, Smith, you must be joking, Draco, or is this the first sign of dark magic poisoning your mind? The mere thought, the mere suggestion of Zacharias Smith as a study partner is abhorrent. He is a menace, a rude and ungrateful snob. The letter went on for a good 8 inches, an essay's worth. Draco put the parchment down with a scowl. She hadn't even considered the benefits, and even 10 wizards for competitions, contacts with other future heirs, and the fact that there were 5 other people besides Smith to have conversations with. He had hoped the mention of Terry Boot, he had seen her study with him occasionally already, would soften the blow. He glanced at the last line. Under no circumstances would I ever willingly breath the same air as that pompous ass. Well, Draco would just need to think of one and make it good. He glanced at Hedwig, who was making herself at home on his own owl's perch, then pulled out a length of parchment and dipped his quill into ink. Dear Hermione. Hermione glared at the letter and huffed. The Slytherin, curse him, had some good points. Not that she wanted to agree. In some small way, it felt almost like a betrayal of Harry, to include others in their group that were not friends of his. But Harry wouldn't be at Hogwarts anyway, and they could still meet privately with him when able. And she was so looking forward to the academia challenges, where it was much better to go in with an entire group than to be assigned one. And they would have someone from every house, something she had seen few other groups have when watching the competitions the year before. She could bet that would work in their favor. But Smith, the Hufflepuff, had degraded her more than once, insulting her intelligence, beating her out in astronomy, she was sure because he cheated, as her S had been nothing short of gold. But if he was on her team, then he wouldn't be on the one against her. She tapped her desk, then pounded it once with a closed fist, startling a hoot out of Hedwig. Sorry, girl, she said fondly, reaching out to gently smooth a ruffled feather. The owl blinked once, then turned away, closing her yellow eyes. Hermione sighed, grimaced, then sighed again. There wasn't anything for it, she supposed. But that didn't mean she had to like it, or that Draco Malfoy deserved to get off easy. Harry walked up the steps of his house in Condon, Australia, gauging the time by a quick glance at the sun. Afternoon, then. He knocked on the door, rewarded when a greeting was shouted from inside. Kerr came around the corner, his eyes lighting up when he saw Harry. Hey. It's been a while. We were beginning to worry. Harry smiled and hugged him, then smiled sardonically. Tiny tell you I came by. Kerr rolled his eyes. Yeah, I think he was impressed with all the wand-waving that went on. I'm guessing these wards will help keep us hidden from others of your kind, like a security system. Harry nodded, and Care stepped back and gestured him in, and Harry followed him into the kitchen, where it looked as if a tornado had passed through and rearranged all the food products, placing them haphazardly and opened on the counters. Care smiled with an apologetic shrug at the mess. "I'm cooking a meal for tonight. Janice's parents are coming over for dinner. You can stay if you like." Harry was disappointed, but shook his head. "No, that's fine. I just wanted to drop by, make sure things are fine." I laughed. "I'm beginning to get used to saying nothing is going on." He paused. "Have you heard from Mike?" Care's voice had turned serious. Harry frowned. "No, but I haven't really expected to. He can reach me if he needs to, and I don't see why the hounds would not pass a message to me through Sirius. It works in their favor to have me trust them." Care nodded, but his face was set in hard lines. He turned, stirring something vegetable in one pot while perusing a long set of directions beside him. Harry sighed and stood. "I'll let you get back to it. Care." His older friend, his brother, turned and smiled. Harry met his guileless gaze and smiled in return. "It might be another while before I come back. I'm kind of in the middle of something back home, but I'll stop by after, I promise." Care grinned and flicked a large wooden spoon in his direction. "I'll hold you to it." Harry sighed, watching as Sirius saluted sarcastically and disappeared to another meeting with the hounds, Remus having already left to meet with Severus for his wolfsbane. He was both relieved and distressed that both men had decided to spend the next full moon with the Lake Pack. On one hand, he had never seen Remus look so relaxed and happy, but on the other, he had been asked to attend himself, and the thought was enough to freeze his heart. What would the werewolves think if they saw him the way he was? How would he handle it, surrounded by so many and under moonlight? And how would the ritual affect things? He was usually exhausted after the cutting, though he wasn't yet to the point of complete collapse. He figured if he did not withdraw from the moon's light, his strength would last until she set. Still, that left him open and weak among people who he couldn't guarantee meant him no harm. He groaned and put his hands in his hair, thinking furiously. There had to be a way. Remus stood nervously among the others, feeling their excitement and mirroring it, though his own was mixed with dread. The sun had set, the sky glowing with streams of pink and purple clouds, stars beginning to wink out of a cerulean expanse. He saw the moon beginning to rise, low and full on the horizon, her power beginning to reach out and itching under his skin. "Where's Harry?" Remus and Sirius turned as Morris and Matty approached. Both seemed larger than they had earlier, what he now could call the aura turning their eyes a deep gold. All of the wolves had broadcasted it as the evening wore on, fingernails beginning to lengthen, smiles suddenly sharp and swift. Remus had remained as he always did, on edge and bracing for the pain. He has something he needs to do first. He will come after. Matty's face creased in disapproval. It is very important for every moon to be spent in an alpha's presence to strengthen the bond. This is why children cannot be reliable. Remus heard an angry growl and realized with a start it was himself. The sound cut off abruptly as he shook his head, forcing back the lurking rage. Morris spoke, his voice calm. "Forgive my mate. She did not mean to disrespect your pack." Remus glanced up and saw Matty looking away and to the side, her eyes narrowed in anger, though she remained silent. Morris continued. "She is right about the bond, however." Remus shook his head. "It can't be helped, and it's only for this summer." He looked at Sirius, who spoke, his grey eyes dancing. "You sure it's all right if I run with you?" Morris smiled broadly. "No problem at all, and it will make Remus more comfortable." As one, they turned, feeling the power growing in strength. Remus began to inch back, away from the others, and outside the circle they had drawn into. The last ray of sunlight left the horizon, the blue ahead now starry black, and resting there was the moon. He felt the anguish begin at his spine, rushing through every nerve and vessel of his body, until he screamed with the pain, loud and hauntingly, echoed all around by 9 other voices. But it seemed briefer, perhaps, than he remembered, and when he opened golden eyes, he met those of another wolf, Morris, large and midnight black, his form stocky and full of muscle from running countless miles across rugged terrain. His form practically screamed dominance, from the lift of his head to the straightness of his tail, though his fur remained smooth and unruffled in challenge. Remus wanted to crouch, whine in anxious fear, but his wolf growled instead, Mooney straightening his forelegs and lifting his head in bold acknowledgement, locking gazes with the black wolf. "I am not weak." They waited, wolf and man together, for the other leader of the pack to strike out at him, to cast him down for his refusal to submit, for a fight to decide the winner. But Morris opened his jaws in a lupin grin and turned, pointing his muzzle towards the forest. And he lifted his head in a howl of song, to the moon and to the pack, and Remus Mooney felt the sound gurgling in his own throat, seldom used for anything other than mad fury or desperate longing, pure happiness and joy. They began to run, dodging into the pine and maple and oak branches, cutting across bushes and thorns, their thick fur protecting them from any dart nature would throw at them. At his side, Padfoot barked twice, his tongue lolling to the side in delight at the run. Mooney found it hard to measure time on moons, and even harder during a run. He knew hours had passed, caught up in the joy of running with other wolves, running for the simple joy of being free and alive. But he was aware the whole time that something was missing, something that should be there with him, and the melancholy dragged at his poor prince, causing him to lose stride with the others and falter, before coming to a stop in a large field between two groups of trees. Sirius paused and turned back to look at him, tilting his head to the side, sides heaving with exhilaration. Mooney looked down at his grey paws, then lifted his snout and cried, howled to the moon, loud and aching and powerful, something inside reaching out and seeking, searching, failing. He dropped to the ground, laying down, putting his head on his paws, tail curled around to his side. He saw the others step up, circle around him, slight jostling for position, many eyes looking down curiously and pitying and even angry, not at him, but at another. Mooney closed his eyes, and there was a sharp nip on his side. He growled but didn't move. Another sharp nip, and another from his other side, and then someone grabbed his tail in sharp teeth and jerked. Mooney whirled, coming to his feet in an explosion of motion, snapping, teeth pulled back in a fierce snarl. A black shoulder met his snout heavily, an explosion of pain behind his eyes, and a weight solidly crashing into his own knocked him from his feet to tumble across the ground harmlessly. Remus howled in anger and rage, jumping to his feet, looking at the many eyes arrayed against him, his wolf growling a steady song of revenge fury betrayal enemy. Padfoot stood off to the side, looking on with wide, confused eyes, making no move toward either side, and Remus felt his wolf brace, wanting with all its fiber to tear into the ones who had dared to provoke him. He was not their pack, he was alone. It hit him again as it had only minutes earlier, that deep well of aching loneliness, and it brought him to his haunches, though he refused to lie down again. So this was a taste of what it would be like, to be a lone wolf, Remus thought. No wonder they went mad. Morris padded forward, his fur blending with the night around them, but his footsteps soft and nearly silent. Remus tried to bristle, but the fight was once more draining out of him. Then he felt it, a gathering storm, an exaltation of power and light and magic, so strong it nearly blinded him, a visible spectrum of something normally unseen. He jumped to his feet and whirled, claws digging into packed dirt, seeing the threads of fire blooming from the air above and ahead of him, and from his jaws came a new sound, one of finally and joy and welcome, one who protects, Moon Brother, pack leader Alpha. This time, Harry and Hermione ate dinner together beforehand to go over what he planned to do and why. He had already told her some about the Pungo Lake pack, which fascinated her to no end, and about Remus's discovery of a new portion of werewolf life and magic. The logistics of meeting with them after a ritual, however, was a more difficult matter. Hermione put her head on her palm, frowning. "I don't see what the big deal is, Harry. Said yourself Darby can bring me back here afterwards." Harry shrugged, then for lack of anything else to do, stood to pace. "I don't like it. What if I lose it while I'm there, or can't control myself, and we are 5 hours ahead of them? Even if I perform the ritual right at moonrise, it will be, for Remus, 5 hours that he runs without me. That's over half the night. The wolves think bad of me for this. They think it's some misuse of authority or something, like I'm not taking care of him." Hermione blinked. "He's not a child, Harry, and he spent all of his life without you. I don't understand how it can be your fault." Harry grimaced. "It's a werewolf thing." Hermione sighed. "You can do the ritual over there." Harry shook his head. "No, I can't just do it wherever, or I guess I could, but I like having it in the same place. Makes me feel better about the whole thing." Hermione threw up her hands. "I don't know what you want me to say. I don't have a time turner anymore, and as far as I know, you can't travel into the past." Harry glared and Hermione sniffed as she continued. So what's done is done. You can't have it both ways, Harry. For a minute he just wanted to shake her and her irrefutable logic. Then he sighed, which turned into a reluctant chuckle. I hate you sometimes, Hermione. Hermione brightened immediately. So does everyone who knows I'm right. Now, what else was on your mind? Harry just smiled. It would be the fourth rune of this set, but the first on his left hand for a new defensive triangle to equal the offensive one completed on his right hand. Harry knelt, wings spread wide, aware of Hermione's gaze on his face as he lifted Dread up and met the serpent's glowing eyes, merging their consciousness into one, bearing fangs at his own body and turning flesh to steel. His body's left hand was raised up and facing him, palm up, fingers outstretched. Giving great fear in troubled times, touched the tip of his razor-sharp tail to the pad of the ring finger, placing the slightest pressure, waiting. And he watched as his own mouth opened to speak the word. Euros. Aurochs, ancient cattle, are being respected and relied upon and feared for its fierceness. It represented persistence, tenacity, and at the end, a single purpose. Stand your ground. He slashed, the simple sharp-cornered U symbol, like the raised horns of a bull, a warning and a promise. I will not be moved. Harry gasped, coming back to himself, the power of the full moon like blessed water on his hot face, running over him and through him and around him, lifting him up into the air. Dread. He gasped or cried, he couldn't tell, but the serpent called back inside him with a quick diving strike. He glanced over at Hermione, who stared up at him with a smile, though he could see the traces of sadness and worry in her eyes now that magic brimmed over in his own. There was a swirl near her of pure energy, not like the moon or sun, but something different, more steady, more reliable than anything that waxed and waned and rose and fell. If he had to call it something, he would brand it Earth. Darby reached out for Hermione and looked up at him, bowing his knobly head, before the both of them vanished in another swirl of power. Magic he had never noticed was so powerful and brilliant, like a mountain one does not realize is so tall until they stand upon the precipice and look below. Harry breathed deeply, closing his eyes and stretching out both mind and magic, his wings taking in the cool air in feathered beats, and the moon lifted him up and cradled him, then sent him spinning with a single call. Moon Brother. Harry, his body still singing with the ritual's magic, followed the trail as a dog does a rabbit, led on by the moon in violent pulses of light, ruthless now in its purpose, with the haunting sound of a wolf howl. Harry called up his phoenix flame and jumped. Above Mooney and the Pungo Lake Pack, in the humid night at the end of June, Harry Potter burst out of flame, his large wings bristling with steel and velvet, their black and silver feathers gleaming under the full moon. Remus kept his feet, but only because he was somewhat prepared for it, that instantaneous rush, as if the moon herself had stepped down to earth to gather her children together. He realized with a start that he had miscalculated, asking Harry to come here, after a night like he would have had. His wolf's happiness could not quite mask his human concern, as the son of his friend seemed to not even see them standing there below him, his normally emerald eyes blown black and dark with power. Mooney whined, a low tone, and Harry's gaze met his own. He heard it then, as he now remembered he had heard that very first night, a song of moonlight and wind, and the swift strike of fang into flesh, the song of paws hitting snow-covered ground. Run, it was a command, and Mooney turned at once, fierce joy overcoming his senses, not caring at the shocked and still pack around him, only slashing out at Padfoot with blunt teeth to catch his pack brother's attention. They were to run, and run they would, until the moon said otherwise or death rose to take them on silent wings. Harry was too far gone, too much under the ritual's power and the moon's thumb to say more than a single word. She wanted him to say more things, to sing whole songs of destruction and war and blood, or ballads of love and glory and revenge. Either path led to something slain, so Harry picked the underlying tone of both, a single chord they shared, of joy and freedom. Run, he wasn't sure if it was Fiannic's song or Parseltongue or something powerful they both shared, but it reminded him of something he had heard before, at the beginning of this set, a voice with no emotion and yet infinite feeling. Then that memory, too, was lost, as he saw the large grey wolf turn tail, bumping into a stunned Padfoot, leading the way towards the large forest ahead of them, his howl ringing behind him like the baying of a call to war. Harry paused, looking over the pack left arrayed in front of him, meeting the gaze of the large black wolf who had stood in front of Moony, with its head held high and proud. That pack was still there, strong and stiff, but then the wolf turned, tail upraised, and followed Moony's trail, raising his own song to be echoed by the pack, as one by one they followed, a long loping trail of wolves, each alive and streaming with power Harry saw now as in blue electric glow, like sparks along a live wire, all connected and yet separate beings, yet one without another would sputter and die. Harry flew above them, each beat of his wings like a push of current through himself to the others, the moon the steady feed of light, until his body burned with it arched and began to spark itself, a trip of electricity, a conductor of light. Harry faltered, and the ritual began to leave him, stuttering once, twice, a third time. His body ached, and he lifted his head to see the sun, its rays just reaching around the earth to touch his face, tender and kind, but filled with a heat that burned his soul. Harry groaned and looked below, seeing through the thinning trees 11 humans slowly sitting up, raising faces to look up at him as he hovered above. For an instant, he debated going down, talking to them, explaining, sharing. But the exhaustion rose on a wave of agony, and Harry let the rising sun help summon weary flames, while the song of a phoenix lulled him to sleep. Hermione opened bleary eyes as she heard a song that at once comforted and filled her with energy. "Masters, Hermione, please, wake up." Hermione immediately sat up in the guest bedroom at Hallam Street, turning to see the wide eyes of the younger house elf blossom. She wrung her hands together, ears wobbling. "Master Harry is not awakening, Masters Herm." Any words that followed that were lost, as Hermione flung her sheets aside and quickly slid her outer robe over her pajamas. "Where?" Blossom led the way down into the living area, still wringing her hands together with wide eyes. Hermione entered, taking in the scene with her breath held in her throat. Harry lay, his wings still outstretched and oddly fragile-looking, draped across the floor and sofa, the end table shoved aside to make room. Darby was kneeling in front of him, speaking in low, worried tones, and perched above his head was the headmaster's phoenix, Fawkes. Hermione straightened her spine, cast her worry to the side, and spoke as she strode forward. "Darby, back off, give him room." House. Elf did so, looking at her with hopeful eyes. Hermione looked at Fawkes, who merely fluffed his feathers, then tucked his scarlet head under one wing. "Well, he doesn't look worried, so I won't be either." Hermione decided with a nod to the open air, then she knelt where Darby had been, looking Harry over with a critical eye. "What happened?" she demanded, and Darby spoke up from behind her. "Darby does not know. Darby found Master Harry and Fawkes here just minutes ago, just like this." "All right," Hermione said and frowned. Harry looked fine, though a smear of blood still stained his left hand. He didn't look injured, his clothes, well, pants were not ripped. Hermione leaned close to his ear, placing a gentle hand on his cheek. Harry, can you hear me? I need you to put those wings back in. Please." She pulled back, and was rewarded when a single glimmer of green cracked from underneath one eyelid. He made some sound, more a sigh than a word, and the large feathers began to glow and shrink. She watched in amazement as what normally took less than a second took minutes to happen, each time turning first to glimmering light, followed by rigid quills and feathered axillaries, until the entire wings were nothing but feathered patterns in the air. Then they too vanished, and Harry began to slide down from his slump on the couch, no longer supported. She quickly reached out and grabbed him, holding him steady, then glanced back at Darby and Blossom. "Well, let's get him to bed." Draco braced himself, holding his castle bright in his mind, its black towers and gleaming obsidian walls, surrounded by forests thorny and menacing. Then he cleared it all away and pushed open the door with the whispered password, meeting his godfather's dark eyes with a calm facade. "Professor Snape, Mr. Malfoy," he replied, and then turned back down to his paperwork, his quill moving with abrupt gestures. Draco didn't show emotion at the nonchalant dismissal, but kept his forward motion, looking around the square room with curious eyes. He didn't often go to his godfather's private home, in part because few were welcome here ever. But when he had owled Professor Snape about examining his fledgling occlumency shields, the wizard had responded with simple instructions. "Clear your mind. Spinner's End." Draco stopped in front of the desk, his body braced, and waited. The professor was writing something, his handwriting straight with none of the frills of other professors. A minute ticked by, then another. He fidgeted, just the slightest bit, shifting his weight from his left to right side, and Severus Snape's eyes lifted to his in one swift motion, their dark depths growing in his mind as he fell. He had cleared his mind, of course he had. Nothing there but mild annoyance, and perhaps a dash of arrogance. But it was enough to grab a hold of and yank, ripping the calm sky apart the way one tears a sheet of parchment, leaving jagged ends and pieces to flutter down to the ground at the base of the large castle of his memories. He felt the foreign entity there, a dark shadow passing across the surface of his forest, creeping over the wall, testing crack and chinks and holes. He frantically tried to clear his mind again, to create that peacefulness and tranquility, thinking of anything, anything at all that would put him at ease, strong enough to resist. He had promised no practical experimentation, no direct eye contact. He had promised. What would Hermione say? And the shadow grasped the thought in sharp fangs, wrapping itself around a statue Draco had not known was there in the midst of a square he had not purposefully built, bright white marble and outstretched arms in the parody of an embrace. Her eyes alight with joy, brown eyes and bushy brown hair, tangled and wild, and a memory grew and took him over, a scene from only a few weeks before. Like Hogwarts. Her voice, soft and questioning, knowing. He shouldn't be surprised. He smiled back at her, or perhaps it was only a smile on the inside, because she was smart and brilliant and didn't know it, or perhaps she did. But it didn't matter, because he could see it, and it was so unexpected. Her to be that smart and kind and muggle-born, and he looked away, couldn't bear to look her in the eye and think it, muggle-born mudblood, so smart, but still so unattainable. Because of that taint, perceived or not, it would be seen by everyone who mattered except the boy who lived. Because he was powerful and did not have to care. The shadow grasped that thought and twisted, and in Draco's eyes he saw another memory Harry, wings spread, green eyes glowing with power, his hands on his temples, his voice low and solemn. Let me show you. And the sun burned down on him, harsh, and agony ran through his bones like the worst type of torture, worse than the cruciatus. And how did they know that? Because they had been there, kneeling at the master's feet, his wand lifted over their head. But it was no longer the dark lord but the sun, changing them, sinew and bone and flesh, crushing them in its grasp, repeatedly squeezing, just because it could crush the life from them and not even care. And there was scarlet flame and phoenix song, loud and triumphant, crying in their ears, screaming. But they didn't care because they wanted to die, wanted the fall to be swift and blessed and cool. Finite incantatum. Draco's throat was raw from the screamed spell, though the voice that echoed through the chamber was not his own, but darker, lower, more powerful. His head throbbed, and he realized with a start that he was laying spread out on the wooden floor, and the ache was where his own skull had hit the ground. He groaned and sat up, his heart still racing, his body feeling like it still hurtled from the sky in the throes of agony. Without thinking it, he whispered the mantra Harry had told him that day, when he had told him that it was not worth it, not worth the loss for the gain. We stopped falling. We came back to ourselves. We landed. Everything was all right. We stopped falling. It's not worth it. Draco. His mouth closed with an audible snap, choking off the mantra before it could continue to repeat, over and over, until the world no longer spun and dropped beneath his feet. He closed his eyes instead, braced his hands on the wooden floor, and levered himself to his feet, feeling as if a stone was chained around his neck. Not until he was standing straight, one fist grasping the edge of the large desk, did he open his eyes. Professor Snape sat there, and his face looked startlingly haggard and sallow, as if some vitality had been sapped from him inside Draco's mind. Perhaps it had, for Draco felt himself like he needed to sit. I need to sit. He hadn't meant to say it, but once it was out, Draco wobbled. With a flick of his wand, the professor summoned a wooden chair from across the study, and Draco collapsed into it willingly, past caring about facade and image. What was the point any longer? That wasn't your memory. No, Draco said numbly, and thought it pretty obvious. The professor only raised an eyebrow. There is a difference between viewing a memory and living it. Even inside a pensive, it is only an echo of thought, and nothing can be touched, can be truly experienced. Inside of a mind in the moment, perhaps, but it is still a viewing, a third entity watching and aware of that difference. Draco didn't need to be led. He had already understood when it happened that something was different about it, the whole thing. He spoke softly on a sigh. Harry doesn't know how to use legilimency, or occlumency for that matter, properly. To his surprise, his godfather chuckled, actually chuckled, and if he wasn't so shocked, he might have joined in because it was kind of funny to think that Harry Potter, who had survived the killing curse, would do anything properly. The professor sighed. He gave you an actual memory of something. Why? Draco looked away and tried to figure out where the line was so he could walk it without a step to either side. I wanted to know why I couldn't follow the same path as he. He thought showing was more effective than telling. Professor Snape did not laugh this time, but his face was now impossible to read, any emotion tucked away behind his level black eyes. I see. And you simply let him do this. I've only heard of such things, actual memory transfers, and they are always erratic and chaotic, with only the most skilled able to impart them without madness going with the memory. Draco only shook his head. It's a brave new world, Uncle Severus. He wasn't sure why he deviated to his childhood nickname for the dour professor, but he saw the slight break in his godfather's composure. You won't tell me what that was about. Draco found himself smiling. And you won't try to look again, will you? Not with that lurking behind every corner. He saw the wince, slight as it was, and his heart leapt. Perhaps that should be my defense. A wall of sun, round about my mind, waiting to trap and ensnare any who try to enter. Fool. His godfather spat, anger curling in his eyes. This is not a game. Your mind is not a toy to play with. You would put yourself in just as much agony as any who entered, leaving you weak and unable to function, and my secret's safe. Draco hissed, and he was standing now, some rush of energy filling his bones along with the emotion. This is a game, the most important one, played with lives. Have you heard the whispers? He saw the narrowing of eyes and continued, voice low and deadly. There have been people meeting with my father, people I've only read about in books, names my father wouldn't dare associate with publicly after the war. I've heard things, and silence. Now it was the professor's turn to stand, and he walked around the desk, grabbing Draco by the shoulders and shaking him once roughly. Don't speak anything more, you risk. What? Draco whispered, and abruptly the weariness was back. You're either on his side or not, and I'm gambling on not. I'm done, don't you see? It's public enough, my friendship with Potter. My father doesn't trust me anymore if he ever did, and my mother, she was crying the other night, as if I was dead already. If he comes back, what chance do I have? His godfather's face was blank now, then he pulled Draco forward into a hug that he had not seen coming. He stayed stiff for a moment, then relaxed, let the growing ball of tension inside relax. Above him, Professor Snape spoke, his voice rumbling. You have more choices than martyrdom to protect another's secrets, and it may not come to pass. But when Draco leaned back, he saw the same fear in his heart mirrored in his godfather's eyes. Professor Snape stepped away, and his voice was now brisk and stern. You have to completely clear your mind, emotions as well as memories. Anything at all can be used as a key. Your castle mindscape is well constructed if you wish to use such a barbaric method, but you panicked, and that allowed me a thought to gain entrance inside. He turned dark eyes onto Draco, who looked away with a slight flush. He was beyond relieved when the wizard did not go into the topic of Hermione. Furthermore, you need much more work on moving within your mind. You do not simply have to be a helpless third party inside yourself. You are your mind. You can hurl bad memories, rearrange towers to create a maze, attack and defend in an endless variety of ways. Creativity is your only limitation with this. Draco nodded, sat down, and looked across blandly, a wealth of emotions now safely hidden behind a Slytherin's mask. I'm open to suggestions. Remus groggily turned over, his head spinning as if he had had an all-night bender at a pub. It was definitely hangover material. Beside him, Sirius began to laugh, a high-pitched cackle that set his thudding ears to pounding. Shut it, bloody dog. Remus growled, flinging a hand in his general direction, rewarded when flesh met flesh in an audible smack. Unfortunately, the cur let out a whelp that pierced 10 times worse than his laugh. Grumbles began to chorus around him, and Remus cracked open a lid, blinking through teary blinding light to see his fellow werewolves in just a bad estate as he. What the hell happened? Zeke, his black hair mussed and stormy blue eyes bloodshot, let out another stream of curses, many of them quite inventive. Remus only shook his head, a motion he quickly quit when it made the headache grow. Everyone, stay calm. Morris's normally peaceful voice was strained, but commanding, and at once the growing noise quieted to the sound of harsh breathing. Remus heard slow footsteps approaching, then the smacking sound of knees hitting dirt. He peeked open his eyes again and saw the hulking black form of the alpha werewolf staring down at him where he lay on his back. Did this happen the last time? Remus licked his dry lips and responded with a croak. No, but he's in the middle of something, magical. Why he was late, delayed. Remus stumbled to a halt and groaned as stars exploded behind his eyes. Morris made a deep rumbling noise in his chest, then leaned forward, speaking in a whisper. I see. Next time, I would prefer he not accompany us under such influences. I almost lost the pack. His voice was solemn, but the words hit a pang deep in his chest. Remus sat up at that, ignoring through sheer will his pounding temples. Hat! Morris met his stare, and his normal dark eyes gleamed with gold. An alpha cannot, under any instances, command a pack other than his own. Whether intentional or not, he lead the pack last night. It was a direct challenge, one I could not respond to unless willing to put what we have built here at risk. I was not willing, but if it was to happen again, I may find myself unable to resist instinct. Remus swallowed, then closed his eyes and pressed them into his bent knees, trying to focus his thoughts. I'm sorry, Merlin, he's just a kid. His voice was strangled with emotion he hadn't known he felt, and he felt Sirius come up beside him, wrapping a loose hand around his shoulders, his presence firm and unyielding. Morris spoke slowly in return, and Remus lifted his head to see his serious face, set once more in calm lines. Wielders of such magic do not have the luxury of being children. You sure you're all right? It's been 2 weeks, Hermione, I'm fine. Harry said firmly, though inside he doubted it as well. He hadn't recovered as quickly or completely as he portrayed to Remus and Sirius. He could barely bring the 2 men back from America, and though Remus had said he was fine with leaving the pack until the rituals were complete, Harry knew he missed the easy camaraderie and acceptance of the other werewolves, and they both had left with more questions than answers. Hermione pursed her lips, but nodded and stepped back. Harry glanced up at the dark sky, then over to where Hermione was sitting on the Gryffindor blanket, a small, charmed orb glowing in her hand. She had decided she was tired of sitting in the dark, and he couldn't blame her for it. Fox had been a huge comfort to her when the Phoenix had stayed with Harry while she was home. But he hadn't accompanied them here, because this was not a ritual to the sun, and a Phoenix was at its heart the sun's creature. Harry reluctantly began to walk towards the circle of gleaming stones, their sparkle greater now than it had ever been, reflecting a starlight that should not be able to reach them with the current cloud cover. But he did not have to see the sky to see that no moonlight shone down, though her power was as great as ever. But different, a darker power, the second face of the coin. The moon was darkness and light, the ever-changing, the fickle one of fate. He realized with a start that he was caught in that gaze and broke it, looking down at his trembling hands, hearing a sound he had not known he was making, a serpentine song of Parseltongue and magic. He stepped into the circle and embraced the ritual, dread curling around his shoulders in scarlet and emerald flames of power, light like what shone in the depths of stones, a prism of trapped eternity. The 5th rune to the 5th set, the second rune of a 3-point defensive arch. Dread swirled up his arm in an inhuman motion, barely touching skin, wings flared in a motion directly against gravity, buoyed by power. He paused, wings and crest flaring in a beautiful display, colored scales turning to molten silver, sharp and deadly, and he was giving great fear in troubled times, the shadow on the ground, the fangs from the sky. Darkest night. Harry whispered to the Quetzalcoatl, the song soft and full of regret. Dread hissed back in return, eyes cold and remorseless. The wheel will turn again. It wasn't wheel as much as it was earth, and globe, and orb, and even sun, because everything turned, you could see it. You only had to look up. Harry broke the gaze and did so, staring through cloud to what he knew was there, because it reached back for him, telling him he was both powerful and weak, great and small, nothing and less than nothing, to the moon, who saw things in tones of light and dark, time waxing and waning into infinity. He closed his human eyes and looked through his serpent, his dagger, his soul, and struck the middle finger of his left hand, a slanted H-shaped cut, the hook on the end oddly tapered and jagged, like an afterthought. Hagalaz. His human lips whispered as his serpentine tongue flickered, tasting the sound in tones of light. Hagalaz, the hailstone, a force of crisis and change. Taking one path of destruction and turning it back again, both greater and more powerful, a drop of water turned to heavy bludgeon. It represented an unalterable repulsion, a turning away of ill will with ill will. It would take what was given and toss it back, greater and more terrible, with no remorse, no emotion, only cold purpose. It would help create a shield that did not absorb, as Heth did, but return what agony was forced upon it. Harry's head drooped, the connection broken, and dread hissed soothingly in his ear. He simply sat there, the ritual magic echoing in the air around him, the dreadful pause before the storm to come. He knew it was coming, knew it, and could no longer turn it aside. He heard tentative footsteps come close as dawn began to light the clearing, heard Hermione clear her throat with uncertainty. Harry! He looked up and put on a smile for her, his friend, his best friend. The only one he ever wanted to see him like this, weak and alone and afraid. Not alone, she said soothingly, and Harry frowned, wondering if he had spoken aloud. She hesitated at the edge of the circle, then braced, stepping in with a quick hop and an instinctive wince that faded into relief when nothing happened at her entrance. She then knelt beside him, reaching out to gently tug one strand of his hair. "Should I call Darby?" she whispered now, as if afraid to raise her voice. Harry shook his head and sighed, leaning toward her, glad when she took the signal and wrapped him into a loose hug. He was slow to call the phoenix flame, and so it startled her to see it gradually form, first wisps of light that grew bolder, darker, until many threads of red and orange and white circled around them like a whirlwind of fire. When it reached its zenith above their heads, Harry gathered it in and around them and let it take them home. The hounds gathered, and they spoke, and they whispered. Across every medium, across every body of water, an undercurrent of intuition and information and action. Magic, she said, is real. Magic, he said, is science. They were growing in form and in number and in knowledge, in every way that mattered, and several that did not. It was a rising tide turning into a tsunami of ideas and thoughts and beliefs, and not all who heard were happy, and not all who learned were afraid. Science is magic to the uneducated, they said. It was no longer one pack of hounds, or several, or 100, but many. Not all street curs or lab rats, but educated and uneducated alike, powerful and powerless, the celebrity and the easily forgotten. All sharing a common bond, a common question. What is this magic? Let us educate you. Against his better judgment, Harry did not call off the monthly meeting at the end of June with his friends. He wanted to see them, wanted to talk and joke and simply feel. But once they were inside his house, he began to see runes in every gesture, every word, every emotion that jumped from them to him, and he had to look down and away. Hermione sat close to him, too close, and he knew the others saw it and thought on it even though they said nothing, because their auras leapt and flickered in the corners of his eyes, Draco's most of all, grey and dark like a thundercloud, rumbling at the edge of the sea. Hermione spoke too loud to cover his silence, was too happy to cover his emotionless gaze. She greeted everyone and led the discussion and demonstrated spells with a flair. And after a mere hour, she began to make his excuses that he wasn't feeling well, a bit under the weather. Doesn't look like any illness I've ever seen. Blaise murmured to Draco, whose thundercloud rolled and rumbled, and Harry imagined he saw a flicker of lightning there of sun. And how odd was that, there in a Slytherin, to find such light. He didn't realize they were gone until it was silent, and Hermione was kneeling in front of him, her brown eyes wide and worried. She was speaking, but he couldn't understand the words for the vibrant color of her, a rainbow of purple and blue and green, a kaleidoscope he could never tire of, if she would simply sit still instead of jumping up in a flurry of motion and commands to his elves, who looked to him like neon greens and yellows and oranges, poisonous and fast and unremarkable until you felt the sting. "Harry, please," Hermione whispered into his ear. Just don't forget to eat." Her voice faded away, and it wasn't until her colors began to dim that he realized the source was gone. The ritual consumed him, as he knew it would, until nothing else mattered. Not night or day, friend or foe, awake or asleep. He felt like two states of being at once, all the time, never quite there and never quite not there. Remus left, he knew that, because odd things were happening and the wolf could hardly stand it, seeing magic at every turn, things moving when they shouldn't, things not moving when they should. Doors that stopped opening, and the upper stairway that stopped leading anywhere at all, only a step into infinity until you turned around and found yourself back on the ground. Remus told him he was going, that he would spend the full moon in Grimold Place, under the potion, that it was only one moon so the wolf couldn't complain too much about it. Harry tried to tell him that the golden strands of wolf and not wolf were merging together to form something new, but he was afraid it didn't come out quite right. The neon green elf and the fluorescent yellow one brought him food and made him eat, though he thought it dull and uninteresting, such bland things, dead and colorless, to be taken into himself, and every second of every minute brought him closer. On the third day after the golden wolf left, Dread came out in ribbons of scarlet to whisper in his ear all the wonderful things they could do. Now that time had no meaning. Or at least that's what he thought it said. It was hard to tell for all the colors the words brought to mind. But giving great fear was wrong, because time did have meaning. Time was the most important thing of all, because it would soon end, it would. His very name said so, didn't it? In troubled times, time-s, which implied there was a time when things were not troubled, when dread did not exist, and those times he was simply Harry. On greatest light, while the moon still sat swollen and fat beneath the rim of the earth, Hermione came to him on the back of bright green magic, her brown eyes full of worry and determination, an emotion that came across as streams of solid orange and deep red purpose. That was the word. She had purpose, and her purpose was him. She took his arm, or he took hers. It was hard to tell, but he brought their colors together, seeing his own in tones of silver steel and black night and forest green, hers that beautiful rainbow that never stopped changing, and around him was the phoenix flame, all colors leading to white but not blue, because that was fiendfire, and it would burn them all. He said as much to Hermione when they reached the clearing, and she only stared up at him with a color he had never seen, a hue of vibrant purple, like a swatch of pure velvet on the back of royalty. She smiled, and reached up to kiss his cheek and whispered, and he understood in that fragment of time what it meant. I'm here for you, no matter how bloody or crazy or powerful or powerless. Good, cause I soon will be, Harry thought clearly for the first time in over a week. Powerless, that is. And he stepped away and into the circle, the moon rising above him, looking down with a baleful eye, almost maleficent, almost evil but not, because the moon was never just one thing. Dread was in motion faster than thought, less than a blink of an eye, unless perhaps Harry had stopped blinking, which was possible. The sixth rune, the last for an offensive shield that could be cast outside of his own body to others, to form around them a haze of power that could not be broken, to turn back what was cast upon it. Tiwaz, Harry whispered brokenly, his face bathed in light, and Dread struck his left index finger, a sharp sting downward, an arrow pointing up. A rune for the guard Tyr, who in ancient times was the guard of war, of justice, the one-handed guard of sacrifice and victory and unfailing law. The knowing that nothing achieved could be done without something also lost, and Harry would pay in his own magic and light to save another, to save someone innocent and bright and loved. The offensive set of 3 was complete, a triangle of power, for a shield that could cover as many people as he chose, a ward of its own that would turn back and change anything it touched to something else. It would stand its ground, Uraz. It would change, Hagalaz, and it would be victorious, Tiwaz. Tiwaz. Harry whispered again, full of power and light, full of unending glory, and saw the hint of its form, a storm so like Thurisaz but different, because it did not strike first. It held firm, held till the last ounce of energy was drained from his own body, and only then would it fall. And he saw it break just as Dread faded with a thunderclap, and his wings drooped and dimmed and fell from his back like the hand of God had ripped them away, and his light inside shattered into a million pieces of agony and loss. And all the color he had bathed in turned to ash and bone, except for Hermione's brown eyes, which met his own seconds before the darkness rose up and stole his thoughts into blessed, iridescent peace. Remus, the wolf Moony, lifted his muzzle and howled, his throat screaming with agony at the sound, at the ripping, the tearing, the horror of it all as it pressed upon him. Sirius burst into the room, half-naked and wild-eyed on his heels creature, his snide face for once no longer masked, but showing worry. Remus tried to speak, tried to tell, tried to say what he felt, but it was only that dreadful howl, coming from some deep well inside, that spoke for him. Sirius paled. Harry. He whispered and turned, the wolf on his heels, leaping up to brush sides with his friend as they raced to the fireplace, throwing powder into the flames, speaking the word so that Mooney could leap through into the emerald tornado of flue travel to be spat out into the living room of Hallam Street, Sirius on his heels, looking about in bewildered terror. Dead, Mooney howled, dead. Remus groaned, dead, gone away. I cannot feel him. He is not there. And then there was a swirl of motion in front of them, a blast of wind that knocked them back, and Darby and Hermione Granger were carrying the limp form of Harry Potter in their cradled arms. Sirius shouted and ran forward, questions echoing into the air, but Mooney only breathed deep wafts of air, scenting the impossible truth. Harry Potter was a squib. Harry opened his eyes to a world blurred and dull. He squinted, trying to bring things into focus, and motion drew his eyes around. Harry. Can you hear me? He could, and the way her face would not focus reminded him of a detail he had forgotten. He licked his dry lips and took a deep breath. I need some glasses. I was nearsighted before the ritual. Oh, all right. Her voice trembled and Harry sat upright, surprised by how much strength the motion took and how slow it was, each muscle individually seizing and contracting and pulling. He reached out to her, fumbled, and then had her hand. This is normal. I told you this would happen. It did the first 2 sets to the moon, no reason to think it wouldn't this time as well. He saw what was probably a nod and closed his eyes. What use was sight if he couldn't really see anything at all? Hermione squeezed, then let go and stood. I'll go speak to Sirius, then see what I can do about glasses. There's a supermarket down from my house that sells basic prescription reading glasses. A pair of those might get us by before it reverses. She was careful not to make the last sentence a question, and Harry was grateful because though his head knew this was temporary, his heart was still afraid it wasn't. She left, and he listened to the quiet, true quiet, no internal commentary from dread, no whispers of magic or song. Nothing but himself, normal Harry, Muggle Harry. The door creaked, and Sirius entered with Remus on his heels. Harry, Merlin, you should have told us. Mooney went wild that whatever barned, it's broken. Did you know this would happen? Sirius, calm down, of course he didn't. Remus hissed over the barrage, and his godfather broke off with a grumble. Harry faced them, eyes still closed, and spoke in a clam-level voice. The last time I did it this way, I had no bonds to be broken, but I did lose my abilities for the 2-week period. It's temporary. I wasn't planning on worrying the 2 of you with it, unless it became necessary. You should have told us. Sirius demanded, and Harry lowered his head. His godfather sighed, and the bed next to him dipped with sudden weight. I'm sorry, it's all right. It's all going to be fine. Harry wasn't sure if Sirius was talking to himself or Harry. Hermione returned that evening, bearing a plastic pair of black muggle spectacles. She placed them triumphantly on his nose, and Harry looked at a much less blurry, if still unfocused, Hermione. He smiled. Nearly perfect. She rolled her eyes, though traces of tension disappeared from her face. Well, they're not prescription, and your eyesight is pretty bad. But she was smiling, and Harry returned it with a grin of his own. Hermione bit her lip, then dragged his desk chair over to the bed, sitting with a solemn face. She fidgeted a minute, then straightened. Harry, I wanted to say I understand now, why you don't want any of us doing these rituals. Harry frowned. I thought we covered that months ago. Hermione glanced away, sighed. But those first few times, they all looked so easy. Sure, I could see the strain, but it was just so anticlimactic. Not a lot of blood, not a lot of pain, the first over in mere minutes. But these last 2, that last one, you should have seen yourself these last 2 weeks. I think your feet did not even touch the ground, you sort of hovered, and you teleported where you needed to go mid-step, as if even the act of walking was no longer necessary. I visited you a few times trying to talk, and you wouldn't even look directly at me, and you said the oddest things. She drifted off, and oddly enough fidgeted before she continued on. It just made me realize how much it changed you, how much you have to go through for those runes. Perhaps a little of what Draco must have felt when you showed him that memory. I wouldn't ever want that. I wish you didn't have to. Harry smiled at her when she took a breath. It's all right. I understand, and I'm glad. I hope I wasn't horrible, but the worst is over now. Hermione's eyes widened. How can you say that? When you're like this? She waved toward him, her gesture taking in his slumped posture, his dull eyes. Harry laughed. Are you saying I'm worse off as a sane muggle than a power-mad wizard? Hermione gaped, then glared. You know, that's not what I'm saying, but doesn't it hurt, not having magic? Harry was tempted to deny it right away, but paused and gave it the thought it deserved. Of course it wasn't all right to have no magic. How could it be? But he could actually think for the first time in weeks, without all the distractions and aching and longing. He felt like himself, if perhaps a little less, and he knew it would begin to chafe soon, relying on others to do what he used to do himself. He looked at Hermione and smiled. I'm not saying I'm happy to have no power. That would be ridiculous. I am happy to be free, even if for only a moment, of all the responsibility that goes with it. Right now, I'm just Harry, nothing else, just Harry. Hermione's brown eyes widened, and then she nodded once, straightening. Well then, just Harry. What would you like for supper? My parents are on vacation in France, a trip I've purposefully missed to spend time with my best friend, though of course they think I'm staying under the supervision of Professor Lupin, who was helpful enough to talk to them for me. In any case, I'm all yours, and expect to get fed like royalty. Harry laughed and levered himself out of bed. Severus Snape scowled at the letter on his desk, and in a quick motion balled it up in his hand, crinkling the paper, before tossing it in the fireplace and watching it burn. The whispers were growing among the old crowd, of resurrection, of intent. It wasn't just former Death Eaters now, it was the underground, the black markets, the illegal pubs. He always kept his ear to the ground, for Dumbledore and for his own protection, knowing he had to always be on alert. The headmaster had warned him that it was not over, and it had been confirmed 2 years ago when the Dark Lord's spirit had possessed Professor Quirrell, and his godson would be right in the middle of it, next to her son. Lucius was being obstinate, risking his only heir's life on the flawed belief that the child would see reason, betray Potter, and set his reputation with the master in stone. Narcissa had a more accurate feel of the child, however, and her latest letter only proved it. Draco had made his choice. Now it was his turn to put himself into place to help the boy, if within his power, survive what was to come. The Quidditch World Cup was held every 4 years, and was an event that every Quidditch fan the world over begged to attend. That summer, the Cup was hosted in England, and was easily touted as the event of the year. Every foreign dignitary seemed to be in attendance in a stadium that seated over 100,000 spectators. For Draco Malfoy, it proved to be an exciting game. Ireland and Bulgaria battling it out, every inch in a Quidditch game full of fouls and penalties. Ireland nearly swept the floor with Bulgaria at the end, but Victor Crumb caught the snitch and ended the game on his own terms, though his team was still down by 70 points. It was enough to nearly distract him from the presence of several redhead weasels, only a box down from his own. What had they done to get such prestigious seats? He yanked his thoughts away from once more following that track, his face smoothing from its unconscious grimace. He was Draco Malfoy, heir to the House of Malfoy, and was above thinking on wizards who did not deserve even their own poor station. He followed his father from the box, listening to idle chatter, subtle political maneuvers, and the making and breaking of allegiances. It was all a dance, and Lord Malfoy performed with a flair. When his father confronted Arthur Weasley, Draco remained silent, purposefully ignoring the hatred spewing from the eyes of the youngest son. He saw the glance his father sent him, the opening, and did not take it. Why should he? Ron was not even worth that much time. When he turned away, he saw that his silence was worse than 1,000 barbs, and it made him smile. Back in the Malfoy tent, Draco went to sit beside his mother, taking up the game of wizarding chess where they had left it to go to the game. Draco. At the sound of his father's voice, Draco turned, a single eyebrow arched in response. Lucius Malfoy's face was cold and still as marble. You may wish to visit your friends before we sit down for the evening meal. It was not a question or a suggestion. It was an order, and for a moment he wanted to fight it, wanted to sit down and play chess. But he was still heir, his father was lord, and his mother looked stricken. Draco nodded and left, seeing the worry on his mother's face. Something was about to happen. He quickly strode to the Zabini tent and found both Blaise and Neville inside, hovering over the recording of the game in a silver pair of omnioculars. They looked up when he entered, their smiles widening. "Draco, did you see that Ransky faint?" Neville began, then stopped as he took in Draco's unsmiling face. "What's wrong?" Draco frowned, then glanced around to make sure the large tent was empty before sitting. "I was banished from my tent." Blaze rolled his eyes. "Do we need to know if your parents—" "Not that," Draco spat. "It wasn't that. Something's going on." Blaze and Neville exchanged glances. "What do you mean?" Neville said cautiously, and passed the omnioculars over to Blaze, who placed them on a wooden side table. Draco only shook his head with a scowl. "They've been planning something these last few weeks, and I think it's going to happen tonight. "Why?" Blaze said, though his face was darkening. Draco laughed darkly. "More like, why not tonight? It's the perfect opportunity. There's people here from all over the world. If something drastic happens, no one will be able to deny it or cover it up." Neville looked down, and fear and determination warred on his face. "Makes you wish Harry was here. I invited him, but he owled back that he was still feeling off." Draco sneered and looked away. "We don't have to hide behind him. We've been training for months, years now, together. The three of us are far ahead of our yearmates." Neville nodded, but Blaze looked uneasy. "You aren't talking about students, Draco, but adult wizards. Quit beating around the bush and tell us plainly what we could expect." Draco hesitated, because even in his thoughts he hadn't put words to it, to what he feared was about to happen. But soon he wouldn't be able to hide behind such vague accusations. He straightened, meeting his friend's eyes. "I believe that the pureblood movement is once more gaining steam, and this cup will be a chance for a demonstration of sorts, a statement from supporters like my own father." "So," Neville said, his voice quiet. Draco looked away as he replied, "So I'm glad Hermione is not here." Hermione and Harry sat across from each other on the large sofa, arguing. "I'm telling you, it's antagonism with 10 letters. Harry shook his head at Hermione's statement. "It says, what is opposed to something?" "I'm thinking opposition, simple and also 10 letters." They locked gazes. Hermione narrowed her eyes. "Well, it's not opposition because that's simply too obvious." Between them, the crossword puzzle lay, various penned in words filling in the blank spaces. Hermione huffed and Harry grinned. "Well, if we're looking for options, resistance is 10 letters too." Hermione opened her mouth, perhaps to start in on another tirade, and the fireplace flared vibrant green. Harry jumped to his feet, brows drawn together as Neville tumbled into the room, one arm around Blaze, both of them covered in white flakes. "Ash," Harry realized, and his heart began to speed up. "What happened?" Hermione yelped, jumping over the table to rush over. Neville grimaced. "Death Eaters at the Quidditch Cup. They cast the dark mark into the sky." Hermione paled and Harry's teeth clenched. "What else? Where is Draco?" Blaze looked up, shook his head. "They set several tents on fire, the ones known to belong to light supporters and muggle-borns, but it quickly spread. We came in by Portkey and didn't have a way out until it activated again tomorrow. Draco's idea was to use some of the international flues set up to get out of there before it got worse. They had. There was this muggle family there, we heard them screaming." Neville continued dully, his eyes flat. "Behind us. But everyone was screaming, yelling, cursing." The Auras arrived. It was flat-out battle for a moment. Not only Britain's task force, but other countries too. Complete chaos, random people being hit by spells. Impossible to do anything at all. "And Draco," Hermione broke in anxiously. Blaze looked over at her and Harry saw something on his face that resembled pity. "He flew to Malfoy Manor. It wouldn't have looked right to come here, considering." "Right," Hermione said, but her face was still pale. Blaze straightened, then shook his head. "I need to return myself. We just wanted to give you a heads up. I imagine it will be in the papers." "Me too," Neville said weakly. "Gran will worry." Harry nodded, but his fists clenched. Blaze and Neville both looked him over as if seeing him for the first time. Neville blinked. "Harry, are those glasses?" Harry looked away. "Yes, an experiment." "Ah, all right then," Neville said carefully. "Glad you seem to be feeling better." Harry only nodded, then sat down. Hermione stepped closer to the others, her voice low. "You're certain it was Death Eaters?" Blaze smiled grimly. "It was the dark mark in the sky, the skull with the green snake coming from its mouth. They wore black robes with the white masks, just like in the old photos. The one the leader, his mask was gold." Neville put in with a shudder. "With 2 snakes etched on the cheeks. I swear he looked right at me." Hermione sucked in a breath. Not. Val, no. Blaze broke in before she could say the name, his voice uncharacteristically harsh. He never went masked. I'm not sure what it means exactly. I don't know of any Death Eaters in the last war that wore a golden mask. Hermione nodded, then stepped back, watching as the two took fistfuls of powder. When they were gone, she turned to Harry, saw the helplessness there, and quickly walked over to him. There's nothing you could have done. Wasn't there, Harry said, and looked away. If not for this. He gestured down at himself. I would have been there with Neville, might have been able to. What? Hermione questioned, then scoffed. You're not some kind of guard, Harry. The way they told it, the best thing was to simply get out of the crossfire. You would have been another person flinging spells and getting in the way. Harry glared, then slumped, shaking his head. I feel useless. Hermione sighed, sat next to him. It's only a few more days. I know. Harry said, then looked up at her through the black spectacles. Are you ready? Hermione looked momentarily surprised, then laughed. I honestly haven't even thought of my part in it, but this is the last, so what do I do? Harry smiled. Just be there, I think. Hermione leaned into him with a sigh. I can do that. She looked over at him, grinned, and it's most definitely antagonism, because the connecting word for five-lettered fruit is apple. Harry groaned. Mike ran a hand over the hair growing on his face. He had always been clean-shaven, proud of the fact he needed to shave every day. But among the hounds, not a single man wore a beard, and it pleased some part of him to set himself apart from the rest. He ate supper each day with Rick at a large communal cafeteria that reminded him achingly of a 3-year period he had spent in public schooling, before he ran away for the last time, never to return, because there was no longer anything to return to but death. The hounds were well organized, but layered. Every person he spoke to had a superior, someone who lived elsewhere, doing something unknown. Many were simply directed by text messages on mobile phones or instant messaging or a particular website of the day. There were codes within codes, and Mike had a hard time just wrapping his mind around it. If they were captured that very day and interrogated, he bet no one would be able to give an accurate grasp of the organization. He spent his days translating nonsense into more nonsense, though occasionally he caught words he recognized, magical words like wards, spells, wands, flu, potions, all thrown into sentences that talked about animals, weather, architecture, words that did not belong. And sometimes he posted things to forums, hundreds a day, brief snippets of words and links that vanished if he looked for them later. Blips, Rick called them, thousands of blips, there and then gone, seen by a few hundred or thousand people, and never to be seen again. And Mike began to realize the common theme that ran throughout them all, as his hand lifted again to touch the necklace Harry had given him. The one thing that every blip used, that every message was sent through, that every hound in the entire building was using daily in their work. The internet. It was so simple and obvious he couldn't believe he hadn't thought of it before. How many people really understood how it worked anyway? How many people understood more about a router than that you plugged it in and flipped a switch? How many could tell you about systems and modems and all the hardware that made the physical backbone of the amorphous invention known as the internet? If even a tech-savvy average human being could not tell you how it was done, what hope was there for wizards to combat it? It had been 2 long weeks of living without magic, and Harry was past sick of it. He could make a list of all the things that rubbed him wrong, but at the top would be the pitying looks he received from absolutely everyone, even the bloody house elves. He was not an infant, nor helpless, and he refused to be seen that way. Even if he couldn't hardly see past his nose without those horrible tacky department store spectacles, he wasn't an idiot simply because he was at the end of a ritual that happened to have sapped his magical strength. With a grumble, Harry swung his legs out of bed and rose to his feet as pre-dawn light began to filter through his bedroom window. This would be the last day, and he was done. Harry felt the ache inside him pulse, that area where his magic had once lay, silent and cut off from himself, unattainable and lost. He pressed a hand against his chest and groaned, then shook his head sharply. He dressed mechanically, then wearily trudged down the steps to the kitchen, meeting Ivy's stern eyes. Pack lunch, please, and dinner for Hermione and me. We'll be gone the whole day. The house elf nodded and left for the pantry, her pristine pillowcase bearing an odd floral pattern he had never noticed before, of climbing green ivy with bright purple blooms. He was used to the elves wearing plain white, and the splash of color startled him. He ate the breakfast Ivy had laid out, turning this new information over in his head. When Ivy returned, he asked her about it. She straightened and, oddly enough, smiled. It is customary, Master Potter, to wear our namesake's sign when a daughter is negotiating. Her voice, always so much more formal than other house elves, even Creature, was especially striking today. Harry raised an eyebrow at the news. Negotiating what? Ivy sniffed. The pursuit of an elf. Harry stared dumbly, then his eyes widened. He had completely forgotten about Darby's interest or the implied question in their conversation months earlier. Harry smiled as Ivy turned to put the dirty dishes away. How are the negotiations going, then? Ivy glanced over at him, her knobbly forehead wrinkled as she smiled. Very well. Darby brought Hermione straight to the clearing, where Harry had laid out lunch on a bright cerulean blanket Ivy had provided. The day was beautiful, a cool wind blowing through the forest to dispel most of the heat. In the shade of the large trees, it was perfect. Hermione beamed, sitting down across from him with a quick huff. So we're ready, Harry laughed. I certainly am. Hermione rolled her eyes, then dug inside the basket for a carefully wrapped sandwich. Harry watched her a moment, then spoke. This one will go a bit differently. She glanced up, nodded, and Harry continued. I'm going to meditate, prepare myself in an hour or so within the circle. Then I will call the runes one by one when I feel it's time. You should join me then, I think. Simply step inside and sit in front of me. Might take a while, so get comfortable. Harry paused, then looked away, bracing himself. The last time there was a great deal of blood. I don't know how it will work this time, but with most everything else being the same, if not more intense, be prepared. Don't let it get to you. Hermione looked over at him, lowered her sandwich with hands that were steady and firm. You can't ask me to not be bothered by something like that, but I won't leave. I won't run. Harry nodded, took a breath. All right. They talked of nonsensical things for a time, Harry keeping one eye on the sun as it moved from directly over the clearing downwards. When the shadow of the trees met to cover the clearing, he stood, unpinning his robe and placing it carefully on the ground. He looked over at Hermione, and she smiled, though it did not reach her eyes. He nodded, though he doubted there was anything he could say to soothe her nerves. Then he pulled his shirt off and folded it as well, placing it on top of his robe. There was no reason to bloody a perfectly good shirt or tear it from his wings. On top of them both he put the black spectacles, glad to finally be rid of them. He stepped out of his shoes, glancing down at the runes on his feet from his fourth set, faded scars that did not yet shine with power, and he knew that before the night was over they would be shiny and red as the day they were cut into his skin. He took a breath and stepped away, walking towards the circle, listening to the birds in the trees. He heard a sound, like a far-off drum, and turned, surprised to catch a glimpse of a single chestnut centaur staring from the trees. It didn't turn or signal, merely watched him, and Harry remembered his name. Firenze, who had told him of the fickleness of stars and the stories they foretold. Harry turned away and lifted his foot over the barrier of the sparkling stones and brilliant flame-colored blooms, and when his foot touched the still freshly turned soil, his heart thudded hard in his chest, and again the drum sounded. Harry closed his eyes and breathed, then knelt down, his knees digging into the soft dirt. He kept his eyes closed, not wanting to see the world blurred and dark, no shape clearly defined. He felt the heat on his skin from the sun, and then felt it leave, a cool touch in its place, and knew it was time. His voice sounded loud to his ears, harsh, like the roar of a beaten lion. Ankh! And on his chest, fire erupted, swift and brutal, and then gone. He paused for but a second, but the words came pouring out like water, one after another, connected together like links on a chain, separate but whole. Memheth Ionine Same Exain. The first seven, the first set, the start of it all. Harry gasped as each rune began to burn, and he felt the smallest trickle of blood well and break from his skin, pain lancing down his spine. His eyes opened, and he saw clearly as Hermione, her eyes locked on his bare chest with dawning horror, stepped in front of him and stood, staring down, mouth open as if to speak. He spoke before she could, the next volley coming upon him like an unstoppable tide of water. Nemesine enigma dynamis thermos sucros icaros croptos. Greek, this time, and sounding odd on his tongue, a chanting song. He felt the pain again, wilder and sharp, so many stinging blades he could not differentiate them, and he felt the growing moisture run through his hair and down his neck. There was no breath this time in between, and his eyes closed out the sight of Hermione falling to her knees, her head shaking in denial, as he chanted the next two sets as quickly as he could, trying to get past this, the cutting, the branding, the scarring, and he felt dread begin to form around his aching shoulders, even as his wings sprang loose to curl around them. Lamed warbeth calf daleth death shin. Fire, so much fire, and the sun which shouldn't be here at all, because the moon was dark and whole, and no light was reflected around to face him except the twinkling stars. Feather bone wing wing tears mouth sun. But how could he have forgotten that the stars were suns as well? Harry cried out as it burned through him, that knowledge, along with the warning Ferenza had tried to impart. There was no escaping any celestial power, no matter how light or dark, as long as one walked the earth. There was a broken sound, a discord in the song he hadn't realized he had been singing, and Harry opened his eyes to see Hermione looking down at the ground, a single hand touching the soil where dark red liquid had begun to pool and creep towards her, as if to stop the tide. The sight brought him back to himself with a yank, and he realized he had stood at a precipice, no fox to pull him back, dread only egging him on with sharp fangs, telling him he could fly. He cleared his throat, and Hermione's gaze yanked up, brown meeting green, and he felt the moon looking down on them both, waiting, waiting. He whispered the next runes to her, as if telling his darkest secrets he hardly dared utter, each one echoed by a thought, a translation, an image, a response from something beyond the moon, older and more ancient than she. Ingaz see daggers don Thurasaz, giant Uras Auroch, Hagalaz, hailstone Tiwas Tyr. He felt the blood drip from his fingers and didn't flinch at it, but kept his eyes locked on hers, not wanting her to look away and see the mess he must look like again, torn open and flayed and stripped bare in the night. Dread hissed above them, his wings sending a gentle breeze to rifle their hair. The hour before it ends. He saw Hermione's eyes widen and knew she had understood the Quetzalcoatl, if not the words then the idea, and he wanted to smile for her, wanted to show some sign that it was all right. But he wasn't inside himself anymore, but above them, feathered wings beating the air, serpentine body slicing through wind, and holding himself aloft, looking down and waiting for the perfect moment to strike the softest place, when the command was uttered into the open air. In Elder Futhark, there was the perfect ideal of teamwork, cooperation, and trust, all represented by the idea of a horse and his rider. Not a master-slave relationship, not a higher being controlling a lower, but a team working together, each imparting their own unique strengths and weaknesses, each separate minds and bodies yet together, a whole with one purpose and goal. It was a bond that could not be broken once bound, a connection forged by choice and ended only by choice. He did not see himself as the rider but as the horse, the one who would bear her across the battlefield, protect her, shield her, carry her to safety. And in Futhark horse was Awaz, shaped like the letter M just as Mem was, meaning water, the protection over his mind and memories and thoughts. And it couldn't have been planned more perfectly if he had tried to years ago, at 9 years of age, innocent and young and already tired. Awaz. The sound split the air on broken syllables, and his body glanced up, breaking the gaze it had held with his best friend. And he struck, not with his tail as he had all the times before, not with the blade of his steel scales, but with his wings, scarlet wings now jagged as spears. The long primaries sharp as the dagger he had once been, ruby red and glowing with an internal light. One beat, two, a sharp scream of surprise piercing the air from behind him as the letter M was once more traced over another letter M, which had been cut over a long lightning bolt scar between his eyes, and green eyes met green eyes like two facing mirrors, endlessly repeating one another into eternity, till the red ran into his eyes and he blinked, blinked again, the burning on his forehead immense, the light rising inside him, one large constellation of light and so confused, because it knew where it needed to go but couldn't quite reach it. Harry, full of it, full of intention and will and power, opened his eyes and saw Hermione, her hands over her mouth, water coming from her eyes, and reaching out, took her hands in his own, careless now of smearing her with his own self, because it had to be done. I yield. Harry whispered and closed his eyes, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago, just now coming back to him, words to a steel dagger that lay prone in his palm. Flesh and blood I yield. And he drew the light from inside himself, from between his eyes, and cast it out to her, her rainbow of colored light, a sparkling blue net of water like a spider web covered in dew until it sank into her skin, fading away along with the bright colors, until all that remained was Hermione, brown eyes wide and shocked. He smiled as he opened his eyes, her hands slick in his, the first smile since leaving her alone with the picnic basket, and leaned forward to speak. "You're protected now. You're protected." It seemed awfully important to tell her that, because she looked about to break and shatter in front of him, and his strength was failing rapidly. Above him, as the moon withdrew her slender fingers from the nape of his neck, he heard another voice, deep, void. We ken it was a mere whisper in his ear, but Harry still flinched, and the motion upset his feeble balance, and he began to tumble until soft arms lunged forward and caught him, though he struggled to call out a warning, because with him came his wings, and their points were steel and deadly. He looked down and to the side and saw a single feather, a secondary silver barred with black brush against the girl that held him, and saw steel turn to velvet, soft as it would feel against his own skin, and relief washed him over into darkness. Hermione fought to keep from hyperventilating. Her mind went through the steps, one she had learned long ago during a lifeguard test she had taken at a summer camp when she was 8, the stern woman's voice ringing in her ears. Breathe, 12,345, breathe. But she was covered in liquid, and it wasn't water, it was blood. In 678,910, out, 1,112,130,1,415. Her heart slowly stopped its stuttering race, the dizziness in her head clearing enough that she realized she was just sitting there in the middle of the woods, Harry still unconscious in her arms. She brushed a strand of hair away from his forehead with red fingers, gingerly checking for herself what she had already suspected. The runes, broken open and fresh only minutes before, were newly healed, the scars covered with new skin. She took another deep breath, tried to ignore the cooling blood soaking into her shirt, and put her thoughts in order. First things first, get them out of the forest. She grasped Harry more tightly, cleared her throat, and yelled for Darby. When the elf appeared, his horrified gaze taking in the scene, she sternly set in on him, secretly telling the orders to herself as well. "It's not as bad as it looks. Take us to his bath, directly. Let's clean him up. No reason to get the living room dirty." She kept her voice light, unworried calm. She felt steadier just with the elf's presence and braced herself for the distinct sensation of being flushed down a drain, the impression she always got from traveling with an elf. Then she felt a weight land on her shoulder and froze. She slowly turned, looking into the bright gaze of Harry's snake. She cleared her throat and spoke hesitantly. "You are coming with us." It was a stupid question, of course it was, but the Quetzalcoatl's tail curled about her neck, and she took that for agreement. She nodded to Darby firmly that she was ready. When they reappeared at Hallam Street on the tile floor of a large master bath, Hermione realized another hiccup to her plan. She absolutely did not want to see her best friend naked. The thought was mortifying. He was unconscious, and what on earth would he think when he woke up? "Mistress Hermione, the water is ready." Hermione looked up from where she had been staring blankly down at Harry and gulped as Darby gestured towards the over-large bath. The Potters hadn't skimped on toiletries, she thought, and then frowned. Harry's wings were still draped over the both of them where they lay on the bathroom floor. Those definitely wouldn't fit in the tub, no matter how large it was. She reached out a tentative finger, poking a single feather. It was soft to the touch, not like the hard steel she was used to. She had known Harry could change them, but he tended to leave them in the metal state, an unconscious defense. It was odd for them to be soft when he wasn't aware, especially since the last time she had found him after a ritual in the living room, they had been as sharp as ever. Around her neck, the Quetzalcoatl hissed, then lay its head against her skin, its scales as soft as Harry's wings. She felt its wings against her hair and wondered how she was going to get the thing off her without getting bitten. Then she turned her mind back to the current task. With a frown, she considered the wings, then looked again at the tub before over at Darby. "Well, I guess we just do the best we can." She carefully maneuvered him around with Darby's help until he was propped haphazardly on the edge. Then, with another deep breath, she grabbed a cloth and got down to work. To her extreme relief, she had only managed to clean his face and back around the large feathers before Ivy and Blossom arrived, scolding her into letting them finish while ushering her into a shower herself. After tentatively trying to get the feathered snake to release its tight hold on her neck, she gave up and stepped into the shower, figuring it would leave soon enough if bothered by water, and probably needed a bath as much as she did if it wasn't. She had to count again to 10 when she saw how red the water was as it washed off her, though blood had never bothered her before. There was simply something about knowing it was Harry's, and it had been done for her, and the fact that it was on her, which was mystifying in itself. She didn't feel any different, and during the ritual itself, she had been too distracted by what was happening to Harry to focus enough on what might have been happening to her. She had heard the Quetzalcoatl speak, Hermione thought with a frown, and something else, not Harry but different. Had it been the moon? It hadn't seemed female, which was how Harry had always referred to it. She cut off the water and stepped out, wrapping a towel around herself and facing the mirror. The snake was still curled against her, and she saw it had drawn its wings tight against its back, its emerald eyes so like Harry's watching her steadily. She looked away, oddly self-conscious, and tried to think. She had thought she had seen something, an instant before Harry had spoken to her, a gleam of sparkling blue. But what was it? She closed her eyes and focused, slipping into the meditative state she had practiced so often the last months. Looking down at the pristine garden she had worked so hard to build, every detail painstakingly created and cultivated and organized into a geometric pattern resembling an exploding star. Butterflies fluttered about, landing on fragile flowers of 1,000 colors. Rabbits nestled under green bushes, a single deer raising its head from where it had been nibbling on a blade of grass. And she saw no shield in sight. She opened her eyes, her frown growing. Surely it hadn't failed. All of that for nothing. Harry cracked open an eyelid, relieved when he felt no pain, his body instead coursing with more energy than he had had in weeks. He was laying on his stomach, and he began to jump out of bed, shocked when he felt the weight pressing down on him. He withdrew his wings with a frown, angry that he hadn't thought to do so before he collapsed. He doubted it had been easy for Hermione to get him back with them in the way. Hermione. Harry looked down at himself, seeing that someone had dressed him in loose pajama bottoms, and prayed fervently that his friend had gotten help from Sirius or Remus. The door opened, wide green eyes looking in before flinging it open the rest of the way, Darby bouncing inside with a wide grin. "Master Harry Potter, sir, you is awake." Harry stretched, smiled. "How long was I out?" Darby beamed, still bouncing on his feet. 3 days, so Mistress Hermione is downstairs with breakfast. Harry straightened, confused. "Mistress, she's still here." Darby nodded quickly. "I'll be down in a moment." When Darby left, Harry dressed, pausing to look over the new runes on his fingers. They were now the same pale scars as the rest of his runes, cutting across the walls on his fingers with small lines. It was amazing that something so tiny had so much potential. He was tempted to try them out, if only to confirm they worked, but wouldn't risk it indoors until tested. He left and jogged down the stairs, turning the corner to enter the large kitchen, then paused in shock. Hermione sat on one of the chairs pulled up to the table, a soft blue robe over her shoulders, lecturing as she poked around the plate piled high in front of her. "Now, this is sausage, also known as pork, which is a large and fat, mostly hairless mammal. What do you think?" So saying, she speared a seared link of sausage on her fork and lifted it up to an extremely avid Quetzalcoatl curled on her shoulder, his wings furled slightly for balance, his long red and green tail wrapped loosely around her neck. Dredd lunged out, snagging the link delicately from the pork and gulped it down in one motion. Then, with a low, pleased hiss, began to speak. "Most tasty, most tasty. More of this sausage, please." Hermione laughed and speared another link, her voice pleased. "Good." Instead of saying most tasty, if something is really good, you can call it delicious. Dredd devoured another link before letting out a sound Harry could only describe as smitten. Delicious sausage, most tasty, delicious. Hermione laughed again, and Harry shook out of his stupor, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Hermione saw the motion from the corner of her eyes and turned, eyes widening, before she dropped the fork and bounded to her feet. the snake on her shoulder squeezing to keep its perch. "You're awake." She flung her arms around him, and Harry laughed. "It doesn't look like you needed me. My snake's talking to you and my elves are already calling you mistress." Hermione leaned back from, her eyes immediately going wide and excited. "Isn't it amazing? I mean, I can't speak Parseltongue or anything. I tried already, and can't understand a lick of what that snake portrait upstairs was saying, though Mr. Dreadful here told me none of it was very nice anyway. Did you do this? How?" She took a breath, and Harry could only say one thing after the long spell of words. Mr. Dreadful. Apparently, Harry had been replaced in his Quetzalcoatl's affections, and the pet names were just the tip of the iceberg. During breakfast, Hermione continually fed the eager serpent, gesturing with her fork as she scolded him. "You really should have taught him a better vocabulary by now, Harry. He has the most outlandish ideas of what words mean, you know. And feed him. I know he's not exactly a real snake, but he absolutely loves to eat." She demonstrated this with another offering of a hard-boiled egg, which Dredd swallowed with a pleased ruffle of the long crest on his neck. Harry just shook his head. Where on earth is he putting it all? Hermione began to shrug, then stopped with an apology to the jostled snake on her shoulders. "I imagine it's simply converted straight to energy. That's my theory anyway. He ate an entire plate of sliced Cornish hen yesterday without a single bulge or, well, other evidence if you know what I mean, and I would have noticed because the silly thing won't leave my side." It was said with a fond glance, and Harry chuckled. "Careful or Crookshanks will get jealous." Hermione smiled but then fidgeted. "Yeah, about that. I had to meet with my parents, explain some of the situation with Dreadful here, so I could stay a few days. We weren't sure how long you might sleep. They gave permission for me to stay until you woke up, on one condition." She glanced at him, then away with a reluctant smile. "I had to keep the Crookshanks with me. Apparently the last time I was gone more than a day, he demolished my mother's antique curtains." Harry's eyes widened, and he glanced around with a frown. "Where is he?" Hermione blinked, then smiled. "Currently basking in the sunlight in that sunroom you have on the 3rd floor. He'll be unhappy when I bring him back. Ivy has spoiled him rotten, bringing cream there every morning. Has a soft spot for measles. Apparently your great-grandaunt used to breed them." Harry tilted his head. "I'm reminded again that apparently house elves live much longer than wizards. That had to be a good century ago." Hermione nodded. "I figured as much. Don't have many children either, I guess, or we would be swimming in elves." Harry nodded without speaking for a moment, then sighed. "Have you noticed any other effects from the ritual, other than your sudden ability to understand dread?" Hermione shook her head, biting her lip. "Honestly, no. I've meditated a few times and haven't seen a sign of any shield or barrier." Harry frowned. "I guess I could try to see, but my own abilities are so different from legilimency it would be hard to tell." Hermione nodded, then motioned with her hand. "Can you look now?" Harry leaned forward, gathering his power to him again, reveling in how simple and easy it was. Then he jumped forward out of himself and into her mind, his vision abruptly flooded with color, blues and green and purples, like an ocean in the tropics, calm and peaceful and elegant spread out in front of him. "Harry!" It was a whisper, and he turned, surprised to see Hermione standing beside him, dread still curled around her shoulders, all of them now standing in the blue expanse of sea. "This. It doesn't look like my mind," Hermione said slowly, looking it over with wide eyes. Harry shook his head, reaching out to touch the wall of color with one careful hand, and immediately the thing quaked and shivered away, the ripples growing and echoing throughout the expanse. "Wow," Hermione breathed. "I felt that it was like a gentle touch, a knock." Harry turned to look at her again as she reached out as well to touch the sea, only instead of shivering it parted before her, a veil of dripping water flowing like a river to either side. Her eyes widened as what was spread out before her appeared. She stepped forward, and Harry followed carefully, leery of the watery door closing behind her. Below them, a large garden grew, lush and well-tended. Hermione turned to him, her eyes bright with excitement. "I never thought to look up. I was below before, inside my mind when I was meditating. I didn't look up." Harry smiled, peering around the veil of water. It surrounded the entire garden, rising up and falling like a waterfall from some expanse that could not be seen, though the pattern of the gentle tide vaguely resembled the letter M. a wide expanse of blue that could be mistaken as sky from the ground, though it shimmered in tones of green and purple. Hermione laughed, and below he saw flowers bud and bloom in response. "This is perfect, Harry. It worked." She reached out to touch him, to grab him into a hug, and suddenly the whole thing tightened and fell, the both of them falling away as Harry was hurled from her mind. He gasped, the wood rough under his fingers as his palms slammed onto the kitchen table. Hermione jumped at the loud sound before giggling out an apology. "Sorry, I didn't know touching you might incite that kind of violent reaction." Harry only shook his head, looking away with a grin, relief flooding through him. It had worked. Draco watched as Hermione fidgeted inside her room and knew immediately she was hiding something. She wasn't a good liar, never had been, and the signs were obvious. He leaned back against the wall, raising a single eyebrow. "We're trying to hide the same secret. Why shouldn't we practice on each other?" Hermione bit her lip, looking to the side, and Draco's eyes narrowed. "I just don't think legilimency is my strong suit. The thought of trying to enter someone else's mind gives me the creeps." It was a weak excuse, flimsy, but the Gryffindor lifted her chin, and he knew it was all he would be getting. He put a smirk on his face, though inside anger and annoyance swirled together. "All right. Any new ideas since we last met?" Again her eyes darted away, flickering around the room. Was she trying to hide something? Was she afraid he might try to read a secret anyway? The curiosity was enough to make him want to try. She spoke cautiously. "Not really. Just keeping on building my garden, organizing thoughts. I've sectioned them off by topics." She began to warm up to the topic, looking at him earnestly now. "Kind of like an organic library. I've got several trees of knowledge now, with branches representing ideas and leaves important passages from books." Draco tilted his head, running his eyes over her face, trying to figure out what was different. "That's not quite what we talked about before. I thought we were trying to misdirect away from important things. A tree would seem an obvious target, not really hidden." Her eyes flickered again, and he saw it now, guilt. She shifted in her chair as she replied. "I've just been thinking more about the organizational benefits of occlumency. Being able to remember things more clearly seems a great advantage, especially if it can also speed up mental reflexes, allowing you to think ahead of an opponent in a duel." It was true, all of it, but it was so wrong from where they had been heading together, an entirely different direction, as if she didn't need to hide her mind any longer. Did she think herself immune now? What was she playing at, to make her mind pristine and beautiful, like a painted sign just begging a passing wizard to take a peek? His anger grew as she continued after a pause, her hands wringing together. "I mean, if I don't let someone get close, what do I have to worry about?" Her voice was light and sweet, and he gritted his teeth, eyes flashing at the pure stupidity of the comment. Draco didn't think, and if he had, he would have known it was wrong, unethical, a breach of trust to the highest degree, but he had to show her, had to prove that she couldn't just leave herself open to attack, that she would never be safe unless she could protect herself. "You mean close like this?" he declared angrily, and took 3 strides forward, and her eyes went wide and large, their brown depths so innocent and guileless his anger rose further, and he grasped the wand in his pocket as he spoke the spell he had never practiced before. Legilimens. He fell down into her eyes, a force pushing him forward in bright bursts of silver light, until he was plunged into water like a wizard falling from a broomstick into the Hogwarts lake. This was not peaceful, or tranquil, or even the murky green color that calmed him through his dormitory window. It was waves of iridescent color, sinking him down, stealing his air as waves crashed into him. First violet, then aquamarine, and then deep sapphire blue, a chaotic swirling of color that drowned him in its depths. And he had no idea any more how to swim, but sank beneath the surface. No idea which way was up and which was down, helplessness pressing in on him from every angle. And then he was free of it, gasping back in his own skin, his eyes spotted from the bright light and burning, while his mouth tasted full of salt and water. He coughed and coughed again, falling onto the bed, sucking in gulps of air. "Get out of my house." He looked up at the cold voice, so unlike the Hermione he knew, and flinched at the rage in her eyes. He tried to bring up his own anger, reminding himself of his purpose, that he had been trying to prove a point, trying to help her. "You've done something." "What was that?" he croaked out, his throat aching. Hermione crossed her arms, eyes afire. "How dare you? You tried to enter my mind without my permission." Draco jumped to his feet. You've lied to me. You were lying just a minute ago to my face. Hermione didn't flinch, but he saw the guilt leap into her face again. I wasn't lying, I. Draco watched her flounder and felt coldness seep into his bones. What did you do? Hermione stiffened, her chin lifted, and then she looked away, lips pursed together. Draco nodded slowly and began to back away towards the door. When he spoke, his voice was cold. I thought we were friends. Hermione growled, her fists clenched tightly together. I thought we were too. For a long minute they stood there, eyes locked. Then Draco turned and left, his steps heavy on the stairs, and behind him there was the sound of breaking glass. Severus looked up as his godson entered, eyes narrowing at the anger he saw there, flickering beneath the carefully composed surface. You're early, he said, and watched as Draco stiffened, then purposefully relaxed again. I want more practice. Severus inclined his head towards a leather chair across from the one he himself sat in front of the large fireplace in his main sitting area. Clear your mind. His godson sat, but not comfortably, lines of tension running through his frame. I don't want you to go easy on me. Severus sneered at the arrogance. I've never gone easy on you. Draco lifted his chin. I meant what I said. He's trying to pick a fight, Severus thought, and asked himself if he was willing to give it to him. Very well. Draco sneered, his mouth opening to speak, and Severus struck, fast and hard, slipping easily into his thoughts without the slightest sound or motion, running his mental fingers through memories of air and grass and stone. Of course, the fool had not bothered to clear his mind. The boy's black castle rose up, every window dark, and the sky above was tumultuous and grey, light flickering in their depths, and he heard angry voices in the harsh wind. Severus crossed the wall, dodging spikes of annoyance and anger and rage, sweeping around a buffeting memory hurled from the sky, and darting into the castle before a bolt of lightning that reeked of sunlight and pain could touch him. The memories spread out in front of him, so many, even as the ground trembled beneath his feet, quaked and made him lose his footing, sliding down a suddenly vertical wall, the very castle tilting up and around to drop him from its holes. But he twisted with it, reorienting himself down, his mind easily walking once more down the halls, following the yelling voices until he reached a dark wooden door, the howling only increasing as he confidently reached out to take the handle, and realized it was a trap as water flooded out, filling his mouth and eyes and ears, sweeping him out of the castle onto the soft ground. But his surprise only lasted for mere seconds, and he turned, changing his shape and form, because he had faced this before, inside another person's mind, a sea much more frightening and terrible than this trickle of water. He stood firm, a giant now, and reached into the clouds and pulled the memory up and over himself, spinning and wrapping it tighter until he stood in a small bedroom, Miss Granger standing across from him, anger rising in his gut as he leapt into her mind, running against a wall of solid water, impenetrable and chaotic, sweeping him out again with words ringing in his ears. Get out of my house. No. Severus found himself hurled from the memory with bands of squeezing sunlight and frenzied rage. He opened his eyes, looking across at Draco slumped in chair, shaking his head, his voice low and angry. I almost had you. I almost got you out that first time. Severus raised an eyebrow. I didn't realize. Draco cursed, looking away with steely eyes. Severus hummed in his throat, idly tapping the arm of his chair. You cannot fight inside your mind with emotion. Not if the very memory you are trying to hide is tied to it. Draco stood, fury shaking his frame, his calm facade shattered. You saw it. What was there? We were supposed to be learning together, practicing, and now she's lied to me. His godson turned to him, eyes pleading, annoyance swirling in his gut. Severus sneered. I'm not here to coach you on your personal life, but on how to protect your mind. However, have care what minds you blithely walk into. Acclumens have had traps far worse than water in their memories. Draco flinched, then looked down, and when he spoke his voice was quiet and full of scorn. We never would have made it anyway. She's muggle-born. Severus raised a single eyebrow, his face now set in stone, the words bringing up reluctant echoes of a time when he himself had said something very similar. Careful, Draco. You may make a Death Eater after all. Draco's head whipped up, his mouth opening to speak. Then he stopped, and the careful mask fell back into place. No, uncle. He looked as if he wanted to say more, but didn't. his grey eyes falling to the fireplace in front of them. Severus let the silence grow between them, his own thoughts dark and twisted. The past had a funny way of repeating itself. He had the odd taste of salt water in his mouth from the memory within his godson's mind, and it reminded him strongly of her son's mind. Just what had the girl done to herself? He had his own suspicions about what Potter had done to gain his unique abilities. That his friend now had elements of it as well was telling. Would Potter bring Draco into it as well, or the Zabini and Longbottom heirs? Draco abruptly stood, face calm and expressionless. "Thank you for the practice. I still have a lot of work to do." He waved one arm in dismissal. "I'm always here, Draco." He used the boy's name on purpose and saw the subtle shift, a bright spark of longing before it was doused. Draco left, heading out towards the main flue in the parlor, and Severus felt it when his wards fizzled at the edge of his mind, telling him his godson had activated the network and left. He looked again at the fireplace and lost himself in memory and speculation and plans. How odd that Draco was following his own path in so many ways. Even with occlumency, the boy had stumbled upon nearly the exact hybrid Severus himself had used to deceive both Dark Lord and Dumbledore. Layers upon layers of memory. One set that of a dark spy, the other light, and between and around them both areas of nothingness, absence of thought and memory and time. A slow death by atrophy for any caught within. Though Draco seemed to prefer pain to nothingness, he wondered if that was a better or worse defense. He wouldn't tell Dumbledore, not yet, about what he had seen within his godson's mind. It seemed there would be a new player, a new force, if the war was to start again. He wasn't sure any longer if the two sides he had been dancing between would be the winning one, with a possible third side in the equation. James clasped his hands together in delight as he looked down at the clothing laid out before him. At his side, Nathan flipped through sheets of stapled paper, his voice droning out details in a methodical voice, as if James hadn't read the paperwork himself. But he had found that the insight from his aide could be helpful, catching on to things he himself had not, so he said nothing and only grinned down at the masterpiece. Synthetic fibers of pub, designed to be worn on as an outer layer. We figure it would need to be, or else a spell would still affect the exterior clothing. It's not bulky, like traditional body armor, which we figure makes sense as we are not trying to stop bullets. Not exactly stylish, but it's just a prototype at the moment. We will make it as long-sleeved shirts and loose pants, then a head covering like a thermal beanie. Gloves could also be standard, though shoes are proving a bit more difficult. Still, we figure hands and feet are not traditional targets for spells. All the spells the aura cast in our footage from earlier in the year hit center mass, the same way traditional police force are trained. Brilliant. James breathed, running a finger down the dark grey fabric. It shimmered slightly under his hands, a side effect perhaps of the metallic fibers. He looked up at Nathan, whose brown hair was wild about his face, and his eyes were slightly bloodshot. "This is brilliant," James repeated, and Nathan finally glanced up from where he was frowning at the paperwork, and sighed, and ran a tanned hand through his hair again, mussing it further. "Hasn't been tested yet, but yes, brilliant." His voice was dull. James straightened. "You aren't happy?" Nathan began to deny it, then laughed harshly. "No use denying it, James." Nathan shook his head, sighed. "It just feels like we're preparing for war here. I can understand protecting ourselves, I get it, but don't you remember how it was when we first started, learning new things, discovering a new civilization?" James crossed his arms. "We know who they are now, Nathan. That life we were looking for out there, we found it, and guess what? They're not all nice. They're not all going to like us or accept us." Nathan shook his head, his eyes shuttered. "That's not what I mean. I just miss the magic." He ended dully, eyes downcast, his shoulder slumping. James was silent a moment, then reached out to lay a hand on his shoulder, shaking him gently until he looked up again. "These measures are just insurance that we protect our own. Things will move forward soon." Nathan smiled slightly and nodded before straightening, though the tension remained around his eyes. "Right, well." He turned back to the papers in his hand, smoothing the rough creases that had been formed from the tight grip of his fingers. James listened with half an ear as Nathan continued with details, his mind moving to a new problem. He couldn't afford to lose his aide. He relied on the man too much. For all the details, he had neither the patience or the time to pursue. Nathan was his sounding board, his voice of reason. Perhaps that was it. They had waited too long, making sure every detail was perfect. Maybe it was time to speed things up. The armor would be ready for mass production soon, and Phase Roman 2 had already begun, the dispersing of new information and spreading their message out farther, reaching new people. Every day more members were joining, believing, many with only word of mouth and vague coincidences and examples. Perhaps it was time to gather some real proof to give them. It had made sense at the time for there to be 7 parts of a soul, to split himself into 7 pieces, to have the sum total of himself equal the great number, to be like magic herself, powerful and infinite and eternal, most of all eternal. But now he realized his mistake. In splitting himself from himself, he had made himself less, a fact he saw easier now that 2 parts had come together and still been defeated again by a boy. A powerful boy, possessing ancient magic, but still a boy. He had immediately thought to seek out his other selves, and traveling the last 2 years had sought them diligently, at times looking through the eyes of an animal, bird and cat and snake, most of all snake, until he came upon her, a marvelous beauty of a serpent, who welcomed him with open coils. Nagini, she called herself, and he thought of Naga, the great cobra god, and smiled. They would be guards together, and how lovely a resident she would have made for a piece of himself, in another time and another place. He learned with deep dissatisfaction that his boy self was no longer where it was to have resided, and contemplated ending his once loyal servant's life for the disobedience. But he couldn't, not yet, not now, not while he was still weak. He turned his serpentine body to a new destination, to the place of his beginning, and in the deep recesses of the gaunt house, he found the ring's self and curled around it, Nagini rearing about it, her fangs glittering in the low light with poisonous intention. But it was his soul that pulsed within his body as he took it back, pulling and screaming and hissing in Parseltongue, his magic growing and bounding within him at the merge, the agony fire in his veins. And then he suddenly remembered the look in his father's eyes when the beautiful green light exploded between them, angry and sad and disgusted and afraid. He had put that fear there and reveled in the knowledge. Afterwards, feeling bloated and sore and yet still empty, he looked through Nagini's eyes and hissed in pleasure. It was, perhaps, not the same fit within himself as had been there before the splitting of soul and magic and memory, but the tears within were even and matched together like long-lost puzzle pieces, creating a picture of himself he had almost forgotten. He no longer just wanted to remake the world, but remembered why. The accusations, the fear, the rage. They were special wizards. They were a step above the cattle of the world, the dregs left behind by magic's kind touch. They were meant to rule as in times of old, meant to show true power to the world with an iron fist. They were the higher powers. They were the blessed. The cup was beyond his grasp still, as was the diadem, while he remained weak. But there was another, and he left the charred ring behind and went for it, the trip long and monotonous and ringing of drudgery, to be forced to crawl upon his belly and eat the likes of mice and rats. But he reached the cave and slithered inside, bypassing wards, slipping into water without a single ripple of light, his eyes made for the depths of the earth. It was there, and yet not. He tasted the difference on his tongue as he looped down to look into the bowl of liquid, and his rage boiled over as he screamed without sound, only the high-pitched song of a snake in agony. It was gone, stolen, gone. Who had taken it? Who could possibly have known? Who, a once faithful, a servant of his who bore his mark. It had to be, and there was only one whose elf he had used, a despicable creature that should have died. Nagini reared up, and her black eyes were lit with scarlet light, as her deep green scales clenched tightly around the bowl. He needed his body. There was no putting it off now, no more places to turn. He would rise again, stronger than he had ever been, and he would find them all, every last fragment of his self except perhaps one. Just one, for insurance. Those who had stolen from him would pay in blood and tears of themselves and those precious to them. No one crossed Lord Voldemort without living to regret it, and that life would be short and filled with agony. To be continued. Interlude. The Pungo Lake Pack, tilde asterisk tilde, tilde asterisk tilde, review please. Tilde asterisk tilde, and leave any advice for an updated summary for this story, if you are willing.